If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 79, Postwar, 1. The domain collision violently tore through space, everything within a radius of 10 kilometers shattered, torn apart, crushed, and exploded. It resembled the explosion of a nuclear bomb, a magnitude 10.1 earthquake spread from the epicenter. Fortunately, Asterion was within Rose's domain expansion, so he was unaffected, otherwise, he would have turned into a seasoned tomato sauce with his internal organs. Rose, sensing the collision, smiled with a crazed grin and infused even more magical energy into the domain expansion. When it came to magical energy, she was proud to say she wasn't afraid of running out. "Let's see who runs out of magical energy first," she exclaimed with an excited look. Herpo began to sweat coldly at the sight. He hadn't expected his own words to turn against him. Asterion and Rose weren't underestimating him and Voldemort, it was he who was underestimating these 13-year-old kids. They forced him to use his domain expansion only to defeat him more easily when he ran out of magical energy. "Very well." Herpo gritted his teeth and spoke. "I thought my arrogance had disappeared over 2,000 years, but today I see that was not the case." Feeling he could no longer bear the drain of the domain expansion, Herpo knew he had lost this battle but not the war. Snapping his fingers, an explosion reverberated in the air. A specific part of Hogwarts had been blown up. This made the victorious smile on Rose and Asterion's faces change dramatically. Rose gradually retracted her domain expansion, and Herpo did the same. Looking at Hogwarts, which had nearly a third destroyed in the explosion, Asterion glared coldly at Herpo. He gritted his teeth and spoke. "You planted bombs in Hogwarts. Coward." Rose glared at Herpo with fury, but she didn't move. Who knew how many bombs he had planted in Hogwarts? If they exploded, all the students inside would likely die. "Do you remember when I appeared in front of you in the cafeteria?" Herpo didn't care about being called a coward. "Before that, I took a stroll through certain places in Hogwarts, leaving some gifts in those specific places. Could you kindly remove the barrier around that space?" Herpo spoke with a gentle smile. Seeing the grim faces of Asterion and Rose made him feel that all the anger and punches he had endured today were worth it, especially after gathering countless pieces of information about Rose. Rose clenched her teeth and closed her hand tightly. Herpo's face remained indifferent as he felt the space around him compressed. If she continued to compress the space, this body would die. Considering the consequences of continuing, Rose opened her hand. Her blue eyes practically gleamed with the anger she was feeling at that moment. Feeling the space return to normal, Herpo's lips curved into a gentle smile, and without any hesitation, he apparat away. Today was a truly relevant day for his future plan. He not only gathered enough information about Rose but also about Asterion, especially the pale monster that could adapt to any attack and action. Voldemort, who was still trying to kill Mahoraga, felt the confinement in space disappear. He apparat away without hesitation, leaving a still-living Mahoraga, although already adapted to his domain expansion. Another loud pop, similar to a car's exhaust, sounded not too far away, making Asterion's face even darker. Herpo and Voldemort had fled. Rose was also not happy at this moment. Today, she learned that you shouldn't let your guard down until the opponent is dead, especially with opponents as cunning as these. Rose and Asterion exchanged glances and vowed to themselves that when they next encountered Herpo and Voldemort, they would kill them as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the faces of Asterion and Rose became solemn as they looked towards the barriers where Dumbledore and Grindelwald were fighting. Even at this distance, the heat wave spread, causing the grass still alive after so many battles to burst into flames instantly. "This war is over." Sensing Grindelwald's magical aura disappear, Asterion murmured, though obviously he didn't think Grindelwald had died. Killing a powerful seer was incredibly difficult. As expected, a serious-looking Dumbledore emerged from the barrier and walked towards them with firm steps. The man seemed in perfect condition, but both Rose and Asterion noticed that his face had a sickly pale tone. Obviously, he had been injured during the fight against Grindelwald, but to avoid causing panic or fear in England, the man had to remain strong and intact. Looking at the devastated terrain around Hogwarts, as if a war had occurred, Dumbledore's eyes grew cold, especially seeing the ruins of Hogwarts atop the hill. This was his home, which he would give his life to keep safe. Seeing it in this state deeply hurt his heart. His pale blue eyes then focused on Rose and Asterion. His gaze softened, and he spoke. "Well done, Rose and Asterion. If it weren't for you, Hogwarts would have been destroyed, and the students would have died. No need to thank us, they mainly attacked me, I just retaliated. Rose shook her head, her tone slightly guilty. In her eyes, all this destruction and death were caused because of her. If she hadn't been at Hogwarts, none of this would have happened in the first place. Don't blame yourself, child. People kill each other for the stupidest reasons, Dumbledore said, his tone gentle and weary. Asterion didn't want to talk to Dumbledore at the moment, he simply apparat to Hogwarts. He wanted to see how Daphne was after participating in a battle of this scale. At least we killed one of the special grade wizards who invaded, Dumbledore remarked indifferently, watching the lifeless body of the Archbishop of the Aurora Society. It was Asterion's cursed spirit, Rose replied with a wavering gaze. Seeing Asterion disappear, Rose showed a complicated look and turned her attention back to Dumbledore. Her eyes grew firm and determined, as if she had decided something important. I accept your proposal, she said, looking at Dumbledore, her voice as serious as it could be. Dumbledore's lips curved into a gentle and genuinely happy smile. He had found a successor. Looking at Vinda Rosier holding a black box in her hands, a smile appeared on Aurelius's lips. Raising his arm, Aurelius clenched his fist, signaling to all his comrades. The pure world is coming, Minerva. Then, Aurelius apparat away, followed by all of Grindelwald's acolytes. Before Minerva could respond, in the next moment, she saw a boy with black hair and red eyes appearing in the middle of the battlefield. With a simple movement from him, all the fanatics of the Aurora Society had their bodies torn apart by a huge crimson serpent that emerged from a dark portal beside him. Red blood from dozens of people splattered across the ground and walls of the courtyard, blood and organs painting the scene like a painting worthy of being depicted in hell. The teachers were indifferent to this scene, but the students, both older and younger, all showed disgusted expressions, some vomited up everything they had eaten today. Covered in blood, Asterion walked up to the blonde teenager and held her face, looking directly into her eyes. You did very well, Daphne, Asterion said with a satisfied smile on his lips. Daphne nodded and remained silent, she had killed at least 5 people today. Although trained to kill without hesitation, she was still processing that she had taken 5 human lives. Asterion naturally knew what Daphne was feeling at the moment. He wasn't a psychopath who felt nothing when killing, he felt the weight of every person whose life he took. But he killed those dozens of people in an instant not because he enjoyed killing, but out of necessity. He would live with all those deaths until the end of his days, and if necessary, he would answer for each death. After a while, Daphne recovered from the emotion of killing and looked at Asterion with concern. You're covered in blood. Daphne didn't mind the pungent smell of blood on his body. She used her thumb to try to wipe the blood off his cheek, although it only made things worse, spreading the blood even more. Asterion laughed at her attempt and held her hand, kissing her fingers tenderly despite the blood staining them. Suddenly, a teasing voice sounded beside them. You only care about your little girlfriend, Asti. Asterion looked at Tracy as she approached him. The girl had a pale face, though she still teased him, showing that she had a good mindset despite the bloody scene earlier. Yet, we're your friends too, Theodoro approached with Zabanai beside him. Even Draco and Doria approached Asterion, any resentment they had towards him seemed to have vanished at that moment. Both twins looked tired and quiet but much more mature after experiencing something like this. 7 special grade wizards fought at Hogwarts today, 1 died, and the other 3 fled, Asterion said, looking at them as he spoke about the details of the war. Asterion didn't hold back, and his voice was heard by everyone in the courtyard. The teachers fell silent, they knew special grade wizards were fighting outside, but they didn't expect there to be 7. And a special grade wizard had died. Chapter 80, Heir of Salazar Slytherin, 1. In the Forbidden Forest, Asterion observed the cave entrance with a calm gaze. It had been a week since the attack on Hogwarts. The incident became famous worldwide, known as the 7 Powers War. After all, it wasn't every day that 7 special grade wizards faced off in battle. The tremors of the fight were felt in almost 40 countries, with gigantic lights observed in the sky within a 40-kilometer radius. Some even assumed a nuclear war was happening. Which wasn't entirely far-fetched, each strike from a special grade wizard was almost equivalent to a nuclear bomb. Another thing was the death of a special grade wizard that shook the minds of many, especially in Italy, which had its only special grade wizard killed. The identity of the Archbishop was soon discovered. Asterion watched with satisfaction as the Italians came to retrieve the dead body of their protector. They all displayed grim and ugly expressions, almost knowing they would have to pay an exorbitant price for damages caused in Hogwarts and foreign territory. Asterion left these matters to the vultures of the Wizengamot, to gain more benefits and power. Those people were like hyenas seeking carrion to satisfy their hunger, never missing an opportunity to take another bite at the dying corpse. But not everything was rosy. Hogwarts had 21 casualties in this short and deadly battle, all of whom were students, almost all from the 6th and 7th years. Asterion saw Dumbledore speaking with the parents of each student, delivering the cruel news that their sons and daughters would never return to them. Some of these parents cried, others cursed, one mother even struck Dumbledore, but the old man remained unmoved as the mother's weak fists collided with his chest. The atmosphere at Hogwarts that week was tense, all the students seemed on edge, as if expecting an attack at any moment. Fortunately, the expected attacks never came, gradually easing the tense atmosphere, and everyone returned to classes as best they could. With the help of magic, Hogwarts was quickly rebuilt, after long hours of spell work and repairing walls with reparo. The world's most famous magical castle rose from ruins even stronger. Dumbledore was the main architect of the castle. He took advantage of the castle still being in the reconstruction phase and refurbished it, giving it a more modern and beautiful look, especially by reformulating and updating Hogwarts' defenses and adding others. The Hogwarts core was also successfully built thanks to the notes left by Rowena Ravenclaw. Her diaries about the core's construction were essential for the reconstruction of the new core, although the main crystal of the core had changed. This week, Asterion sent all his cursed spirits specialized in surveillance, espionage, and probing towards the Forbidden Forest. He scoured every hole in that eerie forest. And finally, after 3 long days, Asterion successfully located where the Chamber of Secrets had been moved by Voldemort. He didn't rush in carelessly. It was almost certain that Voldemort had left traps to prevent him from successfully reaching the heirloom's location, though these measures were somewhat futile against a special grade wizard. There were few things capable of claiming the life of a special grade wizard, especially poisons. It would take a large enough dose to kill an elephant to even begin affecting the body of a special grade wizard. But no one would stand still as a large dose of poison entered them, so there were few special grade wizards who had died from poison throughout history. Still, Asterion didn't enter the cave imprudently. He wouldn't risk his life for something as trivial as assumptions and data over 1,000 years. So, like any person with a bit of intelligence, instead of entering the cave and taking unnecessary risks, Asterion sent dozens of cursed spirits of grade 4 and 3 to trigger all the traps so that he could enter the cave safely. Voldemort would be disappointed if he saw how Asterion handled things. Asterion didn't act as he expected, behaving like a reckless and arrogant teenager because of his power. Entering the cave, Asterion observed that what he thought was a cave, were enormous pipes capable of easily accommodating 5 people side by side. For 1,000 years ago, Hogwarts indeed had pipes worthy of making Rome jealous. As he travelled through the maze of pipes with a Lumos spell on the tip of his wand, Asterion noticed a long shadow standing in one of the corridors. Approaching without fear, he raised his wand and the Lumos intensified. Then, Asterion saw the origin of the shadow. It was a colossal shed skin of a snake-like animal, but proportionally large, nearly 40 meters long. It stood a little over 3 meters tall, enough to eat anything, including humans. It was the shed skin of the basilisk. The movie really didn't convey the feeling of oppression. There was no feeling of oppression and terror seeing such a large monster, but it was entirely different to see it in person. Of course, that was for ordinary people. Asterion, who possessed even more gigantic cursed spirits, remained unchanged in expression seeing the shed skin of the basilisk. But he had to admit, Harry was brave to face such a monster at 13 years old, relying solely on physical strength without using a single spell. Not that it would have worked anyway. Herpo the Foul created the basilisk to be almost immune to magical damage. There were few spells capable of killing an adult basilisk. But locating the shed skin of the serpent, the Black Heir knew he was close to the Chamber of Secrets. Walking for a few more minutes, Asterion passed through a circular door and entered what seemed like a chamber. The floor was covered in smooth ceramic, majestic pillars supported the entire chamber, matte green details adorned the walls, and a long ceramic path crossed a lake suspiciously colored in mossy green. At the end of the path, a huge face that Asterion presumed to be Salazar Slytherin's, stared at visitors with a cold and arrogant look. Suddenly, Asterion noticed a rancid and putrid smell in the air. A hissing sound reverberated, dangerously echoing in the shadows. The sound of something heavy dragging reached Asterion's ears. He didn't need to be a genius to know that the basilisk was approaching. If possible, Asterion didn't want to kill the basilisk. After all, the serpent could petrify anything, including special-grade wizards. It was a great weapon to catch his future enemies off guard. But to conquer the serpent, one had to be a Parseltongue, that is, to speak the language of snakes. This Asterion didn't know if he had, as he tried and never succeeded in speaking it. This indicated that he didn't possess the talent for speaking with snakes, like his ancestor Salazar Slytherin. Asterion hoped that a moment of stress would awaken this hidden talent. Otherwise, unfortunately, the basilisk would have to go to the snake heavens. Then, Asterion heard the sound of heavy stones moving, he saw the mouth of Salazar's face opening, and from it emerged a long greenish serpent with backward-pointing horns. The yellow eyes seemed half-closed, almost as if the serpent had just woken up. Anyone would be upset at being awakened, let alone a huge serpent just roused from a sleep of over 50 years and hungry. This was bad news for Asterion, who wanted a new exotic pet, like those rich people in Los Angeles. But he wouldn't give up, having a basilisk as a pet was something he wanted, and he would have it, even if he had to teach this ancient serpent a harsh life lesson. Strength was always the most civilized dialogue in the world. Chapter 81, Heir of Salazar Slytherin, 2. Focusing his gaze on the basilisk's mouth, Asterion avoided the petrifying stare and easily dodged the venomous bite, which grazed past his body. Asterion attempted to speak amicably with the serpent, but the response was a massive mouth capable of swallowing a whole cow. Obviously, the basilisk had no interest in conversation and was likely very hungry at the moment. The Black Heir wasn't surprised, 50 years of hibernation surely induced a profound sense of hunger. But that also meant the basilisk wasn't at 100%, it was malnourished and hungry, following only primitive instincts to feed. The good news was that it was easier to conquer a hungry and injured animal than one in good condition. The bad news was that a hungry animal would likely risk its life for food. Asterion reinforced his body with strengthening magic and walked along the serpent's long, sinuous body while pointing his wand towards its eyes. With a swift flick of his wrist, a Lumos Maxima was chanted, illuminating the entire chamber of secrets in an instant, almost like the birth of a second sun. The blinding light pierced the basilisk's eyes, bringing a warm, burning sensation and intense pain. The basilisk's enormous body writhed in agony, crashing uncontrollably against the walls of the chamber of secrets. Balancing between the basilisk's horns, Asterion pointed his wand downwards and used a diffindo, but the magical cut left no mark on the basilisk's verdant scales, demonstrating the incredible magical immunity of the laboratory-bred serpent. But Asterion didn't stop using diffindo, instead, unlike the previous attempt, this time he poured even more magical energy into the cutting spell. He believed there was a limit to the basilisk's magical immunity, and once that limit was surpassed, it would be easy to penetrate the serpent's scales. Another thought occurred to him, to use the moment when the basilisk was attempting to bite and cast a stunning spell inside the animal's mouth, rendering it unconscious until the moment he received Salazar's inheritance and awakened his second inborn technique. The only problem with this plan was that the venom in the basilisk's fangs had the ability to break magic, as seen in the movies. This meant that casting a spell in its mouth was almost certain to be nullified. Whoever created the basilisk certainly knew of such an obvious weakness and added the venomous fangs to compensate for such an exposed and easily detectable vulnerability. So it remained for Asterion to create a cut strong enough to penetrate the scales and reach the serpent's flesh, thus casting a stunning spell on the basilisk. As he cast his fourth diffindo, Asterion noticed the serpent was recovering and didn't hesitate to cast another Lumos Maxima, causing the poor ancient serpent to thrash furiously in pain once again. Holding onto one of the horns for balance, Asterion ignored the world spinning around him and continued to increase the potency of his spells. Until he used 10% of his magic in a single attack. The diffindo spell, carrying 10% of Asterion's magic, tore through the air with almost surgical precision, collided with the magic immune scales, and cut through the impenetrable scales first, making a 3-meter-long gash, blood spraying onto Asterion's face and clothes. The serpent, feeling a pain it had never experienced before, let out a hissing roar and violently thrashed against the walls of the Chamber of Secrets, trying to strike the ant on its back. Take a nap, little snake. Asterion gripped the horns to avoid falling and cast a stunning spell with 10% of his magic. At that moment, the enormous basilisk stopped moving and crashed heavily to the ground with a thud. This kind of magical immunity is just too broken. Descending down the basilisk's face, Asterion couldn't help but complain about the serpent's magical immunity. It might seem easy what he did, but it was 10% of his magical reserves. That meant he could only use 8 of these spells. 8. Asterion could cast tens of thousands of spells with his magic reserves. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the smell of blood on him, Asterion didn't bother to adjust his appearance and made his way, covered in blood, down the ceramic path that traversed the suspicious green side. In the Chamber of Secrets, only the sounds of his footsteps echoed in the open space. Arriving in front of Salazar's face, Asterion passed through the entrance, which oddly enough was within the statue's mouth. Inside the statue, he found himself facing a small, narrow corridor that could accommodate only one person. Walking forward without hesitation, the surroundings became extremely silent with each step he took. At the end of the narrow corridor, there was a light, and as Asterion crossed that light, he found himself in front of a medieval living room with a fireplace burning with silent blue flames. Above the fireplace, a portrait of an old bald man with green eyes, dressed in an antiquated wizard's robe and holding a book in his arms. The man moved within the portrait, revealing that it was the animated portrait containing the memories of its creator. Salazar looked at the blood-covered boy and spoke calmly. "After 50 years, another potential heir to my legacy." He opened the book in his arms and conjured a quill, continuing to speak. "State your name and lineage." "Asterion Black Slytherin," Asterion spoke, his voice cold and calm. Salazar, who was about to write the name in the book, couldn't help but pause and look up, his green eyes coldly observing Asterion, particularly focusing on his red eyes. "Black Slytherin, you said?" the portrait asked, as if he had misheard. "Yes, that's correct," Asterion reaffirmed his ancestral lineage. "I met young Corvinus in the winter of 1004. A young wizard, yet undeniably brilliant with an insane dream," Salazar spoke, his green eyes coldly shining with morbid curiosity. "Although I found his dream foolish, even childish, I admired his unwavering spirit. The will to persevere in the face of all difficulties, that's the essence of humanity that Corvinus embodied. That's what makes us superior to all intelligent races," he spoke, his voice filled with pride and disdain for other races. "Tell me, child. Do you dare to do the impossible? Even knowing that it will never be possible to complete your noble house's ancestral plan? Do you dare to walk an endless path?" Salazar's portrait spoke, his voice tinged with a touch of emotion and a look bordering on madness. "I am already treading that path of no return," Asterion looked into Salazar's green eyes and spoke coldly. "Whoever stands in my way, including you, will die." Salazar was very pleased with his young descendant's response. "To accomplish great things, you have to be cruel not only to yourself but to others as well. History taught that, human-shaped monsters who were deified as kings and gods, regardless of how many deaths they caused in the process of their ascensions to the top. But I must say, I did not expect my offspring to one day marry a black," Salazar remarked, looking Asterion up and down. He noticed something curious about him. "Your red eyes are a mutation and make you hypersensitive to negative magical particles. Can you sense people's negative emotions?" he asked. Even though dead for over 1,000 years, his insatiable thirst for knowledge had not changed at all. "Yes, but I don't use it much. Only when I'm creating a cursed spirit," Asterion replied nonchalantly. Salazar's curiosity was a good thing. It meant he had a great chance of awakening his second inborn technique. "Creation and manipulation of cursed spirits," Salazar murmured. "Indeed, an extremely powerful inborn technique. Imagine creating your darkest nightmares hidden in your subconscious." Regaining his composure, Salazar looked at Asterion and showed a cold smile. "I presume you are here to awaken your second inborn technique." Asterion nodded, confirming his ancestor's words. At the same time, he knew what kind of person his ancestor was, someone cruel to others and even more cruel to himself. "The process will be painful, so painful that all 5 attempts before you failed. They all had their spirits, minds, and bodies destroyed," Salazar Slytherin continued speaking with a cold and indifferent tone. "I theorized the awakening of the second inborn technique when I was about to die. I used my third son, who was born without magic, as my first test subject. But in the end, he failed miserably. His body exploded in front of me, spraying blood in my laboratory." Every word of Salazar lacked a hint of emotion. Even speaking of the son who died because of him, there was no trace of regret or pain, almost as if it wasn't his own son who was killed, but just any peasant. "The filthy half-breed before you refused the inheritance when he heard the risks, but it was to be expected. That boy was more afraid of death than anything else." Asterion knew Salazar was talking about Voldemort. He hadn't expected that this was why Voldemort hadn't received the inheritance. Indeed, such a risky thing wasn't something Voldemort could accept, especially since he had feared death when he was still at Hogwarts. "Will you accept it?" "Noble son of the House of Black," Salazar looked coldly at Asterion and asked calmly. Chapter 82, Heir of Salazar Slytherin, 3. I accept, Asterion replied, his red eyes fixed on Salazar moving in the portrait. His voice was firm and indifferent. Regarding the low survival rate of awakening his second innate technique, Asterion was neither afraid nor worried. Baskerville's purpose was to give his life for him if anything happened, he could transfer all the damage to Baskerville in a critical moment. Thus, there was no way he would refuse power, especially after seeing Rose's growth rate. All his hard work seemed unworthy compared to her talent. He needed power, even more power, to achieve his goal, a pure world without monsters, a world where his children with Daphne could be normal kids without the risk of being killed on some stupid mission issued by power-blinded old men. Very well, if that is your will, I shall respect it. Salazar showed a cold smile and responded in a calm tone. He waved his right hand, and with his gesture, the entire living room began to change, as if someone were swapping one Lego piece for another, transforming the entire place. It took only a few moments to change the entire surroundings. What lay before Asterion was no longer a cozy living room but a cold medieval laboratory filled with tubes, cylinders, and a central examination table. Asterion couldn't comprehend how an animated portrait could still possess so much power, even if it was merely a set of memories. I could anesthetize you and your 5 predecessors, but believe me when I say it wouldn't help, not when your body, mind, and soul will be operated on simultaneously, Salazar spoke. 3 gigantic silver metal claws descended from the ceiling and stopped above the examination table, each claw holding a wand, 3 in total. Take off your clothes and lie on the bed, noble son Black. We will begin. Moving all 3 massive claws, each holding a wand, Salazar spoke, his tone devoid of any emotion, resembling a cold and unfeeling machine. Asterion unbuttoned his jacket, then, after removing it, he folded it and placed it on a metal bench. The Black Heir did the same with all his clothes. Now unclothed, he lay on the cold examination table and looked up, where the enormous metal claws moved with almost shocking precision. In Asterion's mind, Salazar's portrait seemed more like an AI than a set of memories placed in a portrait. He supposed there was an energy and control core in the animated portrait, which it could use to control and change things. But he had no time to think further, as a metal syringe was inserted into his neck, injecting a liquid into his veins, causing extreme discomfort. Asterion didn't need to ask what was injected into him, as Salazar had already provided the answer in the following moment. Phoenix tears with other regenerative medicines. His cold voice reverberated through the laboratory. At the same time, sturdy straps restrained Asterion, completely immobilizing him, including a gag in his mouth. This measure was to prevent him from thrashing too much during the surgery. A petrifying spell couldn't be used, as it would alter the body's rigidity, making the operation more difficult. Beginning operation, the cold voice echoed again, and then all 3 gigantic claws approached Asterion. Salazar spoke to himself while the first of the 3 claws opened Asterion's skin, revealing the veins beneath the skin and muscles. Each cut was so surgically precise that the veins remained intact, with blood still circulating within them. While the first claw opened the skin to expose the veins, the second claw opened Asterion's skull, revealing the brain. The third claw was the most mysterious, as it was operating on his very soul. A spiritual body identical in appearance to Asterion's floated beside the physical body. Like the physical body, the spiritual body had its skin opened and its veins exposed. From a very young age, I always asked myself several questions that my incompetent tutors never knew how to answer. What are innate techniques and why do they manifest? What is magic and how can our bodies contain this energy capable of altering reality itself? And finally, what are cursed spirits and why are they born solely from human emotions? I spent 254 years studying these 3 questions. My companions helped me on this long journey for the truth. Rowena, in particular, fascinated me with her thirst for truth. She was the only woman who dared to stand out in a male-dominated world. Having a different reproductive organ never affected her reasoning and judgment, she was terribly cold and calculating. We spent hours together in a laboratory, experimenting with our discoveries on monsters and humans. After hundreds of years of studies and experiments, Rowena theorized that there are different overlapping planes, like layers above our world, each representing a different world full of infinite mystery and possibility. A fascinating theory that could explain the origin of magic. Naively, many wizards think that magic is in the air, a misconception started by a Greek wizard who concluded that the air we breathe was full of magic. But with Rowena's theory, the question arises of how our bodies can contain this energy and use it effectively, and how this spiritual plane, as she called it, is connected to our bodies. The more questions were answered, the more arose almost as if there was no end to the quest for truth. However, this did not discourage Rowena and me, on the contrary, it fascinated and motivated us to press on. Asterion listened to everything while his body, mind, and soul seemed to scream in agony, a pain so intense that it made the sensation of being crushed by a truck seem almost insignificant. Yet, he listened to all of Salazar's words with pleasure, for they opened a window of thought he had never considered before. After 200 years, we concluded that innate techniques are essentially what we desire deep in our hearts, a physical manifestation of magic imprinted on our body, mind, and soul. A miracle that few possess in this world. About 10% of wizards have an innate technique, while 90% do not. However, even after more than 200 years of studies and experiments, I could not solve the enigma of how the innate technique is passed from generation to generation. How one person's desires can transfer to their offspring remains a mystery. But we discovered that the innate technique acts almost like a mystical link, uniquely connecting our physical bodies to the spiritual dimension in a much deeper way, which in turn feeds our magical energy reserves. This explains why wizards without an innate technique do not possess as much talent as those who do. Those who possess it are more deeply connected to the spiritual dimension. At the end of my life, I theorized that it was possible to awaken the dormant innate technique within a wizard, even to awaken other innate techniques within a single body. This was only possible because I met a wizard named Herpo, the creator of the Horcrux. He was still alive after so long. His innate technique consists of seeing and manipulating souls. He created the spell to extract the soul from a physical body, the same one I am using now. Despite the pain he was feeling, Asterion almost immediately thought of the person who was using Mustafa's body, especially after hearing his words while they fought. Herpo had an interesting theory. Unlike Rowena and me, he believed that magic had a single origin, a primordial root that connected everything. He wanted to reach the root and become one with magic. An interesting theory, but full of flaws due to his arrogance. Salazar continued to speak without pause while manipulating the three metal claws with a mastery worthy of one of the most famous wizards of all time. Unfortunately, my research was disrupted. Helga and Godric discovered my experiments with human subjects. Both were furious upon discovering such experiments. After a long discussion, I left Hogwarts and all my legacy in the Chamber of Secrets. Naturally, the blame for all the experiments fell on me, something I did on purpose. Rowena should not bear the infamy I had. Not when she represented all the witchwomen who would be born in the future, where all looked up to her, creating an ideal model for witchwomen. Looking at the nearly fully opened and blood-covered body on the operating table, Salazar couldn't help but show a satisfied expression. Despite a pain 1,000 times more intense than any other, young Asterion only trembled and emitted occasional groans of pain. Compared to his son and the other 5 test subjects, Asterion was faring better. The surgery was going so well that Salazar was surprised. For the first time, he saw a possibility of success. Salazar wondered why his own children lacked such determination and courage. They were unworthy of carrying his name and legacy. Fortunately, after 1,000 years of waiting, he would likely have a worthy heir. Let's move to the final stage, Salazar murmured. Chapter 83, Salazar's heir Slytherin, 4. Moving the operating table with the still conscious Asterion, Salazar floated the table toward a small pool. However, unlike the clear water one might expect, the water was dark and thick, resembling tar. The temperature of the black water was not cold, on the contrary, it was boiling. On the operating table, with blurred and exhausted eyes, Asterion only heard a distant voice, as if echoes overlapped, creating an almost ethereal and vague sound. This is the final stage, young Asterion. My innate technique, hidden within your body, has been brought to the same level as yours. The only thing missing is a large amount of magical energy to awaken my innate technique in your body, Salazar said. If you survive, you will be reborn like a phoenix. Asterion didn't quite understand what Salazar said, as he was too exhausted and had lost a lot of blood, so much that the regenerative liquid Salazar injected wasn't enough to replenish the lost blood. But he knew that what was to come was the final stage. Mentally, the Black Heir called his faithful companion. Baskerville. Under Salazar's cold and calm eyes, Asterion's shadow rippled, and from it emerged a massive dog with hundreds of pairs of red eyes. Baskerville looked at his master and lay down on the ground, patiently waiting for the right moment to receive all the damage his master, creator, and father would suffer. Salazar looked curiously at the cursed spirit but remained completely silent. In his eyes, this was Asterian's method to save himself, even if the operation failed, though he didn't know how. With a cold look, Salazar lowered the operating table and submerged it in the bubbling tar-like pool. Unable to breathe, see, hear, or touch, Asterian felt only as if he were submerged in flames. A large amount of magical energy began to surge uncontrollably through his body, causing an almost indescribable pain. He thrashed even more violently than when his soul was torn open by Salazar. At the same time, the second innate technique within his body, mind, and soul began to emit a green emerald glow. But when the second innate technique was about to awaken successfully, Asterian's own innate technique finally noticed the intruder and, like any animal defending its territory, began to attack the intruder. The other innate technique naturally fought back with all its might. Fortunately, with the energy supplied by the tar pool, it managed to withstand the attack. Thus, a fierce battle ensued within Asterian's body, mind, and soul. A massive, grotesque black monster faced a gigantic green emerald serpent, and the battlefield was Asterian's very own body. Seeing Asterian's body thrashing violently, Salazar frowned. He observed that Asterian was on the verge of awakening his second innate technique when suddenly, he began convulsing violently. Even Salazar did not know what was happening, and then an almost absurd idea formed in his mind. Could it be that Asterian's existing innate technique is resisting the new innate technique? How is it possible for something like this to have instincts? But if we consider that the innate technique is a system with its own immune defense against external threats? Salazar murmured, his eyes filled with fascination and satisfaction at discovering something unknown to anyone else. As for helping Asterian, Salazar had a hypothesis: simply cutting off the energy would be enough to assist him. After all, everything needs energy to move. This is an immutable law of the universe. But doing so would mean admitting the experiment was a failure once again. However, if you were to ask if Salazar would help, the answer would be no. He wanted to see if Asterian would die or be reborn from the ashes. Although losing such a promising heir would be unfortunate, the results generated by the experiment were a significant advancement in his theories. Asterian did not know what Salazar was thinking, nor did he care, for at that moment, he was in a critical state of near death. The two innate techniques seemed incompatible with each other, neither willing to yield and continuing to fight for dominance. Asterian knew that if this continued, his end would be near, and he would once again know the darkness of death. Clenching his teeth, he looked at the two battling beasts and mentally shouted, "You are in my damn body, I control you, not the other way around." When Asterian shouted, the two beasts momentarily paused but then continued fighting. However, this made the Black Heir realize that not all was lost. He extended his hands forward and closed his eyes, attempting to utilize both innate techniques simultaneously. The innate technique creation and manipulation of cursed spirits was something Asterian was very familiar with. He almost immediately assumed control. On the other hand, the innate technique the imperfect destruction of truth was something different, capable of analyzing and destroying anything analyzed. It was entirely different from what he was accustomed to. There was an infinite amount of information, impacting his already exhausted mind, yet the battle had completely ceased. Asterian sighed in relief and continued his control, utilizing both techniques simultaneously, one created and manipulated, while the other analyzed and destroyed. They seemed to form a cycle of destruction and creation, complementing each other. The Black Heir used this synergy and began to adapt. Both innate techniques ceased fighting and started to mobilize together, as if following the same path. If Asterian didn't know that he was awakening his second innate technique, he might have thought he was undergoing a fusion process. Seeing Asterian's body stop convulsing, Salazar couldn't contain himself and laughed. He laughed uncontrollably. "Ah ha 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 ha! Do you see this, Rowena?" Salazar shouted. "This is the result of our research. The first wizard of all time with two innate techniques. Ah ha 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 ha!" Suddenly, Baskerville, who had been lying with closed eyes, slowly opened his hundreds of eyes and looked at the tar pool. A calm and serene look reflected in his 100 eyes. He closed his eyes, and his body expanded uncontrollably until Baskerville exploded directly. With a gruesome and tragic sound, blood splattered everywhere, from the walls to the ceiling. At that moment, an arm emerged from the tar pool, and soon, a body covered in a thick, black liquid rose perfectly well. The familiar red eyes were brighter than ever. Simultaneously, a massive amount of magical energy filled the laboratory, surpassing even Rose's magical energy and approaching dangerously close to Dumbledore's. Emerging from the tar pool, Asterion left wet footprints on the blood-soaked floor. In the end, Asterion transferred all the damage to Baskerville's body. The regenerative liquid from Salazar could not repair the damage caused by the surgery, so, reluctantly, he opted to sacrifice his faithful companion who had protected him many times in the past. Looking at the purple blood covering the walls, floor, and ceiling, Asterion, drenched in tar, surveyed everything in silence. Despite being a cursed spirit, he had a genuinely deep appreciation for them, with Baskerville holding a particularly significant place in his regard. Are you sad about the death of a cursed spirit? I must say, it's the first time I've seen a wizard feel sorrow for a monster. The animated portrait of Salazar was splattered with blood, but the painting itself was clean, his green eyes fixed on Asterion with a hint of disapproval. What I do with my life is none of your business, and be careful, or I'll make you disappear completely from this world. Asterion's words were cold and slightly threatening as he looked directly into Salazar's eyes. Salazar didn't hesitate to mock him, ignoring the veiled threat. I'm already dead. Do you think your little threat scares me? No, I'm sure you're not afraid of death, but you and I are alike in one sense. Asterion's lips curled into a cold smile. I hate it when someone destroys the place I consider a sacred sanctuary. Hearing this, Salazar's eyes almost immediately gleamed, a red pentagram reflected in his green eyes. Watch your words, boy. His voice was low and threatening, almost hissing like a snake. Deepening his smile, Asterion responded to the threat in kind. I say the same to you, decrepit old man. In Asterion's red eyes, a five-sided pentagram reflected. Unlike the red pentagram of Salazar, Asterion's pentagram was black. Asterion understood why House Slytherin was considered magical royalty, even more than House Black. This innate technique was as broken as Rose Potter herself. While Asterion could create anything, this innate technique could analyze and destroy his creations in the same second. How do you block something that can see through all defenses and directly into your essence? The threatening look on Salazar's face dissipated upon seeing the pentagram. He showed a satisfied expression and stroked his long beard. As he watched Asterion walk towards the exit, his clothes stained with purple blood, Salazar Slytherin spoke. You are like me, Asterion Black Slytherin, a monster capable of sacrificing any morals and respect to achieve your goals. But unlike you, who hides behind a foolish dream, I show my true face to everyone. Asterion didn't look back and continued walking with an indifferent expression. Alike? In some ways, Asterion really did think he was like Salazar, but in other ways, they were completely different. Chapter 84, Sequels. Walking through the newly renovated corridors of Hogwarts with his clothes stained with blood, wherever he went, the crowd made way for him, almost as if they were paving the path for their king. After participating in such a high-level battle, everyone realized that only a similar power, like Asterion, could help them, not just them but the entire country. Without beings like Asterion, all of England and the United Kingdom was no different from a child in the face of special-grade wizards. As Asterion was about to descend the stairs and head towards the Slytherin common room, he saw someone he did not want to see at that moment. Mainly because he couldn't control his magical energy as before, not when his magical reserves had almost tripled. Rose's incredibly blue eyes fell for a moment on Asterion's shadow. She was puzzled not to see the adorable hundred-eyed dog. Where is Baskerville? She asked, approaching him, not caring about the putrid blood on his clothes. Backing away from the sudden approach of the white-haired girl, Asterion turned and descended the stairs to the dungeons, but not before answering Rose's question. I killed him. With cold and indifferent words, he disappeared down the staircase. Rose stopped and widened her eyes upon hearing this. She looked at the place where Asterion disappeared and bit her lips in frustration. She felt the distance between her and her cousin had increased. Baskerville's sudden death also left her shocked. The adorable dog was something she liked, especially for the loyalty she felt from him. She also knew that Asterion loved the hundred-eyed dog as well, so hearing that he killed him shook her mind. Looking deeply at the stairs, Rose took a deep breath to calm herself and walked away. She was late for the private lessons she was having with Dumbledore. Inside the Slytherin common room, Asterion sat on the couch and looked at the ceiling, not caring about his blood-stained clothes. Wine, Baskerville, he said while extending his hand, but only silence answered him. That's right, he can't serve me anymore. Asterion murmured to himself. I killed him. Looking at his own hands, he continued to murmur to himself. Maybe Salazar wasn't so wrong, after all. We are the same. Suddenly, he heard a female voice next to him. "You look tired, Heir Black." Looking to the side, Asterion saw a vaguely familiar face. "You really look like Sissy," he murmured. Doria frowned, hearing the intimate nickname for her mother. She clenched her fists and looked at Asterion with a touch of anger. Then, she relaxed her fists and let out a sigh filled with frustration and anger. "How is my mother, Heir Black?" she asked after a brief silence. "Relieved to be out of a marriage with the trash that is your father." Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the teenager beside him and responded casually, not caring about disparaging a father in front of his daughter. "I see." Doria lowered her head and murmured, lost in thought. "May I ask something personal, Doria?" "You can decline if you feel uncomfortable," Asterion asked, surprising Doria. "Feel free to ask, Heir Black," she replied with a calm expression. "Why did you and Draco never care about Sissy?" Doria remained silent, as if considering his words, before finally responding, "Partly because of our father and maybe out of fear." Asterion wasn't surprised by Lucius's involvement, but the fear genuinely surprised him. "Why would you be afraid of your own mother?" Asterion asked curiously. After hesitating for a long time, she answered in a somewhat trembling tone, "We were 4 years old, Draco and I wanted to sleep in her bed, but we saw something that still sends shivers down my spine." She opened her mouth and devoured that grotesque cursed spirit. Doria hugged herself as if trying to warm up. "That scene is etched in my mind. From that day on, every time I looked at my mother or when she approached me, my mind went back to that scene, and I saw her as a monster with cold, emotionless eyes. Sometimes I wondered if one day she would devour me as she did that cursed spirit." She finished with a slightly trembling and tearful voice. Asterion listened to everything in silence. Manipulation of cursed spirits, the simplified innate technique of the Black House, involves exorcising the cursed spirit and swallowing it to control it. "You probably know this," he said to Doria, who nodded silently. "After being exorcised, the cursed spirit transforms into a blue orb in our hands, and then we swallow it. The taste." Asterion paused, choosing his words carefully before continuing, "It's the worst taste you can imagine, like an old rag soaked in feces and anything disgusting you can think of." His words made Doria's eyes widen in complete disbelief. Unfazed by Doria's wide-eyed reaction, Asterion continued. "Day after day, night after night, we exorcise and consume cursed spirits, the filthiest things to ever walk the surface of this planet. This affects our minds, makes us colder and unable to show many emotions. That's the price of gaining such power. But I'm sure nothing hurt Narcissa more than seeing her children afraid of her." His cold and indifferent voice struck Doria like thunder. "I know it must have been a traumatic scene to witness at such a young age, but give your mother a chance, because she's suffering more than you can imagine." Leaving these words, Asterion climbed the stairs and headed towards the boys' dormitory. Drained on the sofa, Doria stared at the ceiling and remained in complete silence. "Mother." In Asterion's room, he could be seen unbuttoning his shirt while looking at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red, exhausted, and cold. He grabbed a wine bottle from the table beside him and drank directly from it, but before he could finish all the alcohol, his hand started to spasm, making it impossible for him to control his fingers. Asterion watched in silence as his fingers twitched in all possible directions. The bottle slipped from his hand, shattered into pieces on the floor, spilling the purplish liquid everywhere. Gripping his wrist tightly, Asterion clenched his teeth and stifled a pained groan as an overwhelming pain coursed through his body, reminding him of Salazar's surgery. Falling to his knees, he breathed heavily as his hands gradually returned to normal and the pain subsided over time. Asterion knew this was the price for gaining unnatural power. A black pentagram appeared in his eyes, and Asterion looked at himself. A hologram of his own body appeared in his mind, with several red areas indicating where he was injured. It was not surprising, given that even his soul had been opened. It was normal to have any after effects from a surgery. His had just begun to appear and would likely become more painful over time. But Asterion estimated that potions would alleviate the after effects, possibly even neutralize them. Rising from the floor, he could still see slight spasms occurring in various parts of his body. "I need to return to the Black Mansion, not just for the potions lost with Baskerville's death, but also to start preparing for Voldemort's official return," Asterion murmured to himself as he finished unbuttoning his shirt. Chapter 85, Civil War, 1. Entering the Black Mansion, Asterion walked into the living room. Next to the fireplace, he found Arcturus, the head of the Black House, seated in an armchair while reading his newspaper. Unlike his usual elegant attire, he was dressed in comfortable, loose clothing, something Asterion never thought he would see Arcturus wear. Looking around, the entire living room seemed the same as when he left, with one exception. The animated portrait of his grandmother, Walburga, was above the fireplace. "Welcome back, Asterion." Without lifting his head to look at his great-grandson, Arcturus continued reading with a calm and indifferent expression. A cigar, releasing a thin stream of smoke, rested between his lips. It seemed the old patriarch had returned to his old smoking habits. "My lovely grandson." The animated portrait, of course, noticed his arrival, facing the door as it did. "It's good to see you still so lively, grandmother." Handing his coat to Kriaker, who stood nearby, Asterion loosened his tie and spoke as he sat on the sofa. "How was Hogwarts?" Walburga asked, her voice full of happiness at speaking with her grandson again. She seemed like a normal, concerned grandmother if not for her extreme racism, rivaling or surpassing that of Hitler. "It was." Asterion pondered for a moment and concluded with a single word: enlightening. Shifting his focus from the newspaper, Arcturus's gaze fell upon his great-grandson. A satisfied smile appeared on his lips. Holding the cigar between his fingers, he flicked the ash into the ashtray and spoke, "I see you've matured, not as arrogant as before." Asterion did not respond and instead redirected the question back to him. "Any movement within the Pureblood faction?" It was almost certain that after escaping, Voldemort would regroup with his old fanatical followers. This was inevitable, but it also meant a civil war was about to erupt within the noble faction. Arcturus narrowed his eyes, looking at his great-grandson and wondering how Asterion had learned this without him sending a letter. "Voldemort is back, at least a part of him." Sensing his doubts, Asterion didn't hide it and said it directly. Arcturus's eyes grew cold upon hearing his words. Now he understood why people were restless. The monster that had terrorized England 13 years ago had returned from the dead. Everything made sense now. Before, he was puzzled by the agitation. After all, his great-grandson was the only special grade wizard in the Pureblood faction, the only one who could stand against the most powerful wizard in the world and his successor, Rose Potter, another special grade witch. Unlike the Light faction, there was no possibility of two lions occupying the same mountain in the Pureblood faction. Especially since Voldemort had killed Regulus, his son, and Asterion's father. "What do you plan to do?" Arcturus straightened in his chair and asked, his relaxed aura completely vanishing, replaced by the aura of a man nearing a century in age. "Kill." Asterion uttered a single word, his red eyes glowing with a black pentagram. "A massacre. Treason must be met with the highest penalty, death." Arcturus was satisfied with the response. Hesitation meant weakness, and weakness translated to death. Suddenly, Arcturus noticed the black pentagram in his great-grandson's red eyes. "What happened to your eyes?" "Power," he continued. "Power enough to make Dumbledore hesitate to attack me." Arcturus and Walburga in the portrait couldn't help but widen their eyes. Asterion's words implied that he could fight and even defeat Albus Dumbledore, the strongest wizard in the world. "What did you do?" Unlike Walburga, who couldn't be happier and prouder, Arcturus frowned deeply. If there was one thing he knew about the world, it was that there was always a price for power. What was necessary? Asterion didn't explain and had no intention of doing so. His words made Arcturus even more concerned. He got up from his chair and walked over to his great-grandson. Standing in front of him, he gripped the boy's shoulders and looked deeply into his red eyes. "Asterion, this isn't a game. You've gained a power you shouldn't have. There is always a price for power." Arcturus spoke, his voice tinged with worry and anxiety. Of course, Asterion knew that the surgery he underwent would leave lasting effects on his body, mind, and soul. It was the price for gaining such immense power in such a short time, but in his view, the benefits far outweighed the disadvantages. "I'm fully aware, Lord Black." Removing Arcturus's hands from his shoulders, Asterion spoke, his face remaining indifferent. Though Arcturus's concern warmed him, he understood that, above all, actions had consequences. Arcturus himself had taught him this when they first met. Seeing this, Arcturus only let out a weary sigh and sat down next to his great-grandson. "You're as stubborn as a bull, just like your father," he said, his voice helpless. Walburga couldn't help but worry, but she said nothing. She could see that her grandson was quite independent when it came to himself. "Where is Bella?" Feeling the atmosphere a bit heavy, Asterion changed the subject. Humph! At the mention of his great niece, Arcturus snorted coldly. The girl disappeared a week ago and hasn't returned. She's probably with Voldemort at this moment. Asterion nodded, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He didn't think Bellatrix had betrayed them. The woman might be insane, but she was loyal to the family above all else, unlike his uncle, Sirius. Asterion remembered something and called out loudly, Creaker. Instantly, a house elf in old, worn clothes appeared before Asterion. I hear your call, Lord Asterion, he said, bowing humbly. His raspy, aged voice was somewhat uncomfortable to listen to. Did Bellatrix leave anything with you before she left? Asterion asked. Yes, Lord Asterion. Lady Bellatrix left a box with Creaker and ordered Creaker to give it only if you asked, the house elf said, gripping his own ears tightly, almost as if he wanted to tear them off. Bring it to me. Asterion ordered under the surprised eyes of Arcturus. Yes, my master. Creaker disappeared the next moment. A few moments later, Creaker returned, holding a wooden box in his hands. Taking the box, Asterion opened it and saw a jeweled golden cup. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff. With this, there are 4, Asterion murmured, closing the box. He already possessed the locket of Salazar Slytherin, the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, and the ring of Marvolo Gaunt. 3 were missing, the snake Nagini, the diary, and Rose Potter herself. Though he didn't consider the latter a concern, he doubted that Rose would fail to notice a fragment of soul in her own body. Chapter 86, Civil War, 2. Asterion. Hearing his name called, Asterion looked towards the door and saw Narcissa entering the living room. Her pale hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders and back, and she wore a simple black dress. Narcissa seemed much freer than before, not as serious as when she got divorced. The divorce really helped her readjust her life. You've arrived at a great time, Sissy. Setting aside the box containing Hufflepuff's cup, Asterion spoke calmly. What do you need me to do? Sitting beside him on the sofa, Narcissa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and asked with a serious look. An informal gathering, drinks and cigars, for our guests. Asterion replied, his red eyes glowing momentarily. He couldn't believe all the noble houses had surrendered to a crazy psychopath who kills on a whim. Even the stupidest person knew that aligning with someone like that was a huge risk, especially with this civil war about to break out. Has something very serious happened? Noticing the seriousness hanging in the air, Narcissa's gaze moved between Asterion and Arcturus. Voldemort has returned. Placing the cigar between his lips, Arcturus replied, releasing a trail of smoke into the air. His cold and indifferent eyes hid a faint murderous intent that lingered in the air. The image of Regulus's body returning in a coffin couldn't help but appear in the old patriarch's mind. A shiver ran through Narcissa's body upon hearing the cursed name, her face paled as she relived some memories of encounters she had with the Dark Lord. After a prolonged silence, she asked, another war? Just a civil war within the faction, but I do not rule out Dumbledore entering the war. Asterion replied, his gaze thoughtful. Taking a deep breath, Narcissa tied her hair into a ponytail and responded as she stood up from the sofa. I will make the preparations, the entire living room will be ready to receive our guests tonight. Thank you, Sissy, your help at this moment is crucial. Asterion thanked her with a smile on his lips. Without Narcissa, planning a last-minute party would be a challenge for him and Arcturus, as neither of them knew anything about organizing parties or gatherings among nobles. In the future, as his wife, Daphne would be responsible for these types of formalities, such as parties and informal gatherings. It wasn't just Daphne, one could say that in British society, women were essential for these types of tasks. Giving Asterion a kiss on the cheek, Narcissa hurried out of the living room. She had much to do and plan. At times like these, she missed her sisters, even the crazy Bellatrix. I hope many come. Flicking the ashes into the ashtray, Arcturus sighed with a touch of weariness in his tone. Those who don't come are enemies of House Black. Rubbing his forehead, Asterion replied exasperatedly, feeling a prolonged headache, apparently another side effect of the surgery. Not many in the first place. Voldemort left a deep mark on his own allies, especially after the revelation of his mixed blood origin. Arcturus spoke, with obvious sarcasm at the mention of Voldemort's mixed blood heritage. Hiding will give an impression of fear to his allies, so he has to choose a good location for his base and start preparing for war. Arcturus continued. That filthy rat is probably at Lestrange Manor or Malfoy Manor. Asterion nodded. War wasn't as simple as one might imagine. No matter how many men you have, without logistics behind it, everything will collapse like a house of cards. Arcturus looked at his thoughtful great-grandson and couldn't help but let out another heavy sigh laden with guilt and helplessness. Sorry to make you bear this burden when you're so young, Asterion, he said, his voice tired. Arcturus knew he didn't have much time left, but he really didn't expect that at the end of his life, he would still be part of another war. If you want to be king, you must bear the weight of the crown. Asterion responded to Arcturus's words with another phrase, one that made the old patriarch smile. Yes. With a nostalgic smile, Arcturus closed his eyes and replied peacefully. Old age is affecting me, sometimes I forget my own principles. Both remained silent after this conversation, enjoying the warm and comfortable silence before the fires of war engulfed England once again. Later that night, more and more guests arrived at Black Manor, men and women, all of noble origin and powerful wizards, mainly those with an aged appearance, all of whom emanated powerful and sharp auras like swords ready to be drawn at any moment. These elders were of the same generation as Arcturus, invited by the patriarch himself, perhaps the last request before his death. All experienced individuals who had spent decades fighting between life and death. In the living room, everyone was seated in elaborate armchairs and chairs, a large amount of accumulated smoke hovered in the air. The patriarchs of noble houses sat on the right, with their wives on the left. I will be direct and to the point. Sitting in the main chair, Asterion looked at everyone present, his demeanor calm and composed, even under numerous gazes. Voldemort has returned. The murmurs that had filled the room almost immediately ceased completely. From this moment on, those who have come to this meeting will be my allies. I will protect you as your future leader. Although his voice was calm and cold, it somehow soothed the entire room. Voldemort is not the problem. Everyone listened intently, the mere mention of his name made some present shudder, showing the monster Voldemort was. The only problem in this civil war is that in the end, we will be even more weakened. We won't have as many seats in the Wizengamot as before. Dumbledore will take control of the Wizengamot. The tense atmosphere was revived once again with Asterion's words. The Wizengamot was created by them to remain in power after the dissolution of the old Wizards' Council. The smartest among them had already guessed what was about to happen. Counting everyone present at this moment, we have 17 of the 72 old noble houses that founded our society. Asterion continued. Now, like our ancestors, we have two options in front of us. Continue with the Ministry of Magic or dissolve the current regime and found another. When Asterion's voice fell, everyone became lost in thought, all deeply considering his words. What they were discussing was not irrelevant, it would change the entire internal and international landscape. What do you propose, Lord Black? An elderly lady asked, taking the lead. We won't be able to stay in power within the Ministry of Magic, even with the neutral faction on our side. Asterion's gaze fell upon his future in-laws, Aurelius and Helena Greengrass, next to them, the youngest daughter of House Greengrass, Astoria Greengrass. As for Daphne, she was sitting right next to Asterion, holding his hand the entire time. I propose we create another governing body. Asterion spoke with determination. Honestly, there was another option, to use the lesser noble houses to occupy the seats of the great houses that had disappeared over time, but that was impossible. The power of the extinct noble houses had already been distributed among the great noble houses over millennia. Decentralizing at this moment was a risk of rebellion that Asterion didn't want to take. Thus, creating another governing body was essential, especially so that Asterion and the noble faction could still have power in the future. Otherwise, with the few seats they had left in the Wizengamot, Dumbledore would create more and more laws gradually stripping them of their powers, and they would no longer be as powerful as before. The noble houses that founded the British Wizarding Society and influenced the entire world in ancient times will gradually be sidelined for a filthy democratic future where Muggleborns and half-bloods gain more and more power. What new governing body would that be, Lord Black? Arthur Knott, father of Theodore Knott, asked. Looking at everyone present, Asterion spoke. The Clock Tower. Clock Tower. Everyone murmured, rolling the word around in their mouths as if tasting its meaning. The Clock Tower, Asterion replied solemnly, meeting Arthur's gaze. It would be a governing body comprised of a parliamentary table of 12 lords, elected with 5-year terms subject to re-election. The Clock Tower will be a place of politics and innovation. It will be the center of our society, a place where our magical civilization begins to advance, surpassing all others. And how would we do that? Aurelius Greengrass asked, his question striking directly at the heart of the matter. All noble houses, regardless of who they are, must open their libraries and place their legacies in the clock tower. Asterion said, but only silence responded. Chapter 87, Civil War, 3. Asterion's proposal made everyone hesitate. They were not noble solely because of innate skills, the monopoly of knowledge was what made them superior to Muggleborns and half-breeds. While Muggleborns only began studying at 13 when they went to Hogwarts, descendants of noble houses started from childhood, laying a solid foundation for their future. Giving up this advantage was something they were reluctant to part with. As the future Lord of House Black, I will be the first to open the library of House Black. The entire legacy of House Black over 1,000 years will be placed in the Clock Tower Library to be accessed at any time, Asterion said, seeing everyone hesitating, including House Greengrass. He wasn't surprised. He expected this when he proposed it, so Asterion was the first to set the example. Asterion's words widened many eyes. The idea of freely accessing all the knowledge of House Black, successor to House Slytherin, made everyone look at Asterion with warm gazes, almost as if they were admiring a beautiful woman. Asterion knew that knowledge was a tempting weapon, used by those who knew how to manipulate it to establish the foundations of human society, creating a society like no other, differentiating humans from other magical sentient races. No wizard would resist the temptation to obtain all the knowledge of a great noble house like House Black. House Greengrass will also open its entire library, Aurelius, Asterion's future father-in-law, said, supporting the idea. There was a smile on the man's lips. With Aurelius's words, other patriarchs made their decisions. House Caro. House Shafik. House Yaxley. Listening to everyone, Asterion firmly held Daphne's hand and could barely stop himself from smiling. The first part of his plan went so smoothly that it surprised even him. Asterion even thought of sending a gift to Voldemort for making things easier for him. And the gift he would give to his father's killer would be a slow and painful death. Will Dumbledore accept this new government? Arcturus asked, calming everyone present. Yes, Dumbledore had to accept the new government so that the Ministry of Magic could peacefully and orderly dissolve without bringing too much chaos to the country. Taking a sip of wine, Asterion wasn't dissatisfied with his great-grandfather's words. It was a very important question in the first place. Savoring the wine for a moment, Asterion swallowed the purplish liquid and calmly replied, Dumbledore will accept it. The clock tower will facilitate the rise of Muggleborns in our society. His words made everyone's faces darken. The idea of Muggleborns freely enjoying the knowledge accumulated by their ancestors left a bitter taste in their mouths. I know what you're all thinking, but consider a different angle. Asterion didn't need to read minds to understand what was going on in these people's heads. We will still be in power. Our knowledge will be used to foster new innovations in our society. We can use this to our advantage without attracting too much hatred. In other words, the future creators of these innovations will have to sign a profit-sharing contract, or they won't be able to patent their own creations. This made everyone feel better. Yes, as long as they were in power, they could create laws to prevent certain unpleasant things, like the possible future tide of democracy coming in like a tsunami. But, before we begin our preparations, I know many of you were Death Eaters, Asterion spoke, grabbing everyone's attention again. A slight tension hung in the air, anticipating his next words. I don't trust you, his words were direct and to the point. But for this to work, we need to have a certain level of trust among all present. I propose an unbreakable vow for all of us, he continued without waiting for anyone's reaction. This unbreakable vow will be performed during a ceremony for each new member of our faction. In other words, my children, your children, grandchildren, and future descendants will be required to make an unbreakable vow to ensure the security of the interests of our noble houses. Although Asterion knew that the unbreakable vow wasn't so unbreakable, given that the vows of Dumbledore and Grindelwald were broken, but the unbreakable vow was still the most powerful binding method in the wizarding world. Which was a great solution to the problem of distrust. Everyone didn't rush to respond, and Asterion wasn't in a hurry at this moment. It wasn't an easy decision to make. It involved the possible survival of their houses. It was totally normal for them to talk amongst themselves. While everyone conversed among themselves, Daphne approached Asterion more closely and whispered, You really surprised me, I came urgently after receiving my mother's letter. Her warm breath tickling Asterion's ear. Asterion looked at her and rolled his eyes. What excuse did you give to leave Hogwarts? He whispered. I just said that my sister's situation worsened, Daphne replied innocently. Asterion just shook his head. He looked at his friends accompanying their respective parents, they were all silent, looking at him with admiration. The only thing bothering him was that Draco and Doria weren't present, which meant they were on Voldemort's side, or rather, where Lucius wanted them to be. Asterion estimated that about half of Slytherin was empty at the moment, which must have surely surprised Snape with so many excuses students used to leave in the middle of the school year. This must have also alarmed Dumbledore, who obviously knew that Voldemort had returned. Poor Snape, Asterion pretended to be sad and sighed. Please, you must be happy about his suffering. Showing a playful smile, she whispered in his ear as their fingers intertwined. Squeezing her hand firmly, he casually replied, I'm not that cruel. This time it was Daphne's turn to roll her eyes at his remarks. Remembering something, Daphne whispered to him, Rose has gotten quite close to Dumbledore recently, she's spent a lot of time in his office. Asterion was surprised for a moment but calmly accepted the news. It was expected that Rose would side with Dumbledore, especially after the Hogwarts attack. Worried about your cousin? Daphne teased sarcastically, seeing his silence. Was that a hint of jealousy I detected in your tone? Asterion raised an eyebrow and asked, his voice tinged with amusement. You went into a broom cupboard with her, Daphne spoke coldly, her voice almost spitting venom. Firstly, she dragged me in there. Secondly, nothing happened between us inside the broom cupboard. Thirdly, she just wanted some advice about her life. Holding Daphne's hand firmly, Asterion patiently explained. For some reason, he found his fiancée's jealousy quite adorable, especially regarding Rose, whom he only saw as a cousin with some parental affection. Daphne felt like some weight had been lifted off her shoulders hearing his words. Although it was normal for a lord of a noble house to have lovers outside of marriage, she didn't want that for her future marriage. Asterion was hers, and she didn't want to share him with anyone else. Lord Black. Hearing his name being called, Asterion focused his attention on the guests who had stopped murmuring among themselves. It seemed like everyone had come to an agreement. A good thing in his opinion. We have agreed to make an unbreakable vow. In the future, our interests are intertwined not only by promises but by blood and magic, Aurelius Greengrass spoke, assuming the role of representative of the nobles present. Everyone applauded for the wording choices of Daphne's father. The man was a born politician who took on the role of representative in a few short minutes of discussion. Asterion presumed that the man would be one of the 12 lords of the clock tower in the future, especially with the support of the neutral faction, which was not as neutral as before. Asterion rose from the chair that resembled more of a throne and lifted his wine-filled glass. Everyone followed Asterion's lead, rising from their seats and raising their glasses. A toast to a new beginning and a new era, Asterion spoke, displaying a rare smile. A new era! A new era! A new era! The patriarchs exclaimed as they raised their glasses high. Watching everyone like this, Asterion smiled and drank all the purplish liquid from his glass in one gulp. My era! He murmured to himself. Chapter 88, Civil War, 4. Lestrange Mansion. Seated around a long rectangular table, 12 witches and wizards remained silent. Of the 12, at least half had escaped from Azkaban, all of them looking towards the head seat, where a young man with soft black hair and red eyes was seated. The table, a huge serpent was smoothly sliding between the plates and goblets. A hissing sound echoed particularly loudly in the silence of the room. Perhaps the only one relaxed in such a tense environment was Bellatrix. The woman was filing her nails, ignoring the murderous looks her former husband, Rodolphus Lestrange, was giving her. Blowing off the nail remnants, Bellatrix extended her hand and looked satisfied at her perfectly manicured nails. What can you tell us about your cousin, Lady Lestrange? Lucius asked, his tone low, fearful of offending the head of the table. Bellatrix placed a finger on her lips and pondered her choice of words with an innocent look. In terms of appearance, he's adorable, lovely, cold, and very cruel. He wouldn't let me eat sweets after dinner. In the end, she spoke with a particularly resentful tone. Lucius's face twisted slightly at the absurd response of the mad woman. He's talking about his weaknesses and strengths, Lady Lestrange. Ernest Macmillan, Patriarch of House Macmillan, spoke, his voice somewhat helpless. Although he noticed the murderous look from the Patriarch Lestrange when he called Bellatrix Lady Lestrange. In terms of strength, we will die almost instantly if we face him head-on. Any special level cursed spirit will turn all of us into a delicious tomato sauce seasoned with our organs to put on the salad. Bellatrix spoke in an animated voice, as if being crushed was a good final fate. This made everyone avert their eyes. Conversing rationally with a madwoman was difficult, especially with Bellatrix, who was famous for her madness. But when it came to loyalty, no one questioned her. Everyone could betray the Dark Lord, but not Bellatrix. The woman was such a loyal follower that she did things that made some people in this room feel sick. And mind you, no one present in this room was innocent. The person with the fewest kills had at least 10 deaths to their name, so it was quite an accomplishment to make these racist murderers feel nauseous. We already know that, Lady Lestrange. Lucius spoke in an annoyed tone. Bellatrix's green eyes fell on Lucius, her lips curling into a malicious smile as she spoke in a sadistic tone. How's the single life? Bringing your sex toys home? Poor Narcissa, betrayed and even blamed for the divorce. If it were me, I would have killed the mistresses and the fruits of the betrayal right in front of you. When she said this, Bellatrix intentionally looked at Rodolphus, who seemed ready to attack at any moment, especially at the mention of his beloved and dead child. Everyone felt a chill hearing this. They did not doubt that Bellatrix could do it. Lucius, in particular, showed a cold and slightly murderous expression. Enough of this foolish discussion. With a cold and indifferent voice, everyone fell silent and focused on Voldemort, who was petting the serpent Nagini. Asterion Black's weaknesses, Bellatrix, Voldemort said, his tone making everyone shudder involuntarily. Bellatrix showed no fear, her smile grew as she spoke. There is only one. Everyone looked expectantly at Bellatrix. And what would that be, Lady Lestrange? Ernest asked eagerly. He loves his family. As Bellatrix finished speaking, everyone fell silent. Bellatrix's words were obvious to everyone. It's unrealistic to attack Black Manor. Voldemort looked at Bellatrix with his red eyes and spoke calmly. Even though he had never been to Black Manor, he knew there was certainly something of great danger protecting that 1,000-year-old mansion. I agree. Surprisingly, Bellatrix agreed with Voldemort's words. Attacking Black Manor is a suicide mission. Arcturus wouldn't hesitate to blow up the entire mansion with everyone in it. A heavy atmosphere hung in the air. We will first attack Gringotts, Voldemort said, drawing everyone's attention immediately. We will leave no one alive. Yes, my master. Bellatrix was the first to speak. She stood up and saluted like a soldier who had just received orders. As for why they were attacking Gringotts, Bellatrix didn't ask, nor did anyone else around. Working with Voldemort, they knew that questioning orders meant death. They had seen this happen countless times in the war 13 years ago. No one wanted to be the next corpse thrown into an unknown ditch. Suddenly, everyone heard a knock on the door. Enter, Voldemort said casually. The doors opened, and a young girl of 13 entered the room, with pale blonde hair and icy blue eyes. The drinks as ordered, father. The young girl bowed to Lucius, and the trays holding wine glasses floated automatically to the table. Picking up the wine glass, Voldemort's cold eyes fell on the girl with a faint murderous intent. You should bow to me, Doria. This is my final warning to you. Thank your father for being a loyal follower, otherwise, I would kill you now. Doria's body trembled at his words. She quickly bowed to Voldemort and spoke with a slightly trembling voice, why yes, my lord. Fear infiltrated the young girl's heart like a deadly poison, making her look as if she was about to die at any moment. This horrible feeling made her face pale. Ignoring the tense atmosphere caused by Doria's mistake and Lucius's extremely irritated face, Bellatrix looked at her niece and spoke cheerfully, you really look like your mother, Doria. As if hearing a call for salvation, Doria looked at the aunt she had never had contact with and greeted her respectfully, but did not bow due to the previous events. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, aunt. Bellatrix hummed and casually chatted with her niece. You are almost a copy of your mother, she looked exactly like you at your age. Enough of the useless chatter, Bellatrix. Voldemort interrupted the conversation and spoke, prepare for the attack. Everyone stood up, placed their wands over their chests in respect, and left in an orderly fashion one by one, leaving Voldemort alone, petting Nagini and lost in thought. Dash. Inside a room. Sound of a slap. The sound of a loud, strong slap reverberated between the walls. Holding the left side of her face, Doria suppressed the tears threatening to fall and looked at her father with a resentful gaze. Never embarrass me like that again. Lucius roared, his eyes almost brimming with fury. You are just like your mother, useless, not even fit to perform simple tasks like serving drinks competently. Draco, who was watching everything from the side, opened his mouth to defend his twin sister but closed it, seeing his father filled with rage. But it doesn't matter anymore. You will marry the son of House Macmillan. Calming down a bit, Lucius straightened the creases in his clothes and spoke coldly. Doria couldn't help but widen her eyes upon hearing that, the memory of the Macmillan house son appearing in her mind. A decently handsome but talentless skinny boy. Doria didn't want to marry someone like him, weaker than her, not her who had always been taught to respect the strong. Seeing the veiled rejection on her daughter's face, Lucius mocked, "Who said you have a choice?" Without waiting for her to respond, Lucius left the room with his cane. Sister. With their father absent, Draco approached Doria, but halted his steps at that moment. Doria looked at him as if he were a traitor. Draco clenched his fists and tried to explain, but every time he tried to speak, the words couldn't come out. Wiping the tears from her eyes, Doria straightened her back and showed an indifferent expression. Leave, Doria spoke coldly. Leave my room now. Draco hesitated but obeyed and left the room with his head down. Now alone, Doria bit her lips so hard that blood came out. Looking at her wrist, she felt disgust and hatred seeing the skull and snake tattooed on her wrist. Suddenly, the doors of the room were abruptly opened, startling Doria. Looking up, she found her Aunt Bellatrix looking at her with a big smile. You're bleeding. Bellatrix noticed the blood on her lips and the red mark on her niece's left cheek. She already knew what had happened. It's nothing, Doria tried to wipe the blood from her lips, but only made it worse, spreading it all around her mouth. Sitting on the arm of the chair Doria was sitting in, Bellatrix spoke with an amused smile. Staying strong even after what happened, your mother would be proud of you. My mother would probably mock me if she saw my state now, Doria spoke, her tone low and full of disdain for herself. Knowing Sissy, she would have hugged and comforted you in her arms. Then she would have ripped Lucius's head off for touching you. Bellatrix spoke, her lips curling into a cold and sadistic smile. She approached Doria's face and helped clean the dried blood spread around her mouth. You are very beautiful, you must have many suitors at Hogwarts, Bellatrix commented amusingly, looking at her niece's lovely face, which had entirely inherited her sister's beauty. Not as many as my mother probably had, Doria replied in a lighter and more relaxed tone with the change of subject. You have no idea how popular Narcissa was at Hogwarts. The famous Ice Queen of Slytherin. The line of suitors was so long that almost every boy had a crush on her. If she winked at a boy who was dating, relationships would end, Bellatrix said, recalling her time at Hogwarts with a low laugh. A smile appeared on Doria's lips upon hearing this. But her smile faded. Daphne Greengrass is the Queen of Slytherin. Her tone was a bit disheartened, she should have been the center of attention, but because of Daphne, she was just another pretty girl. Being Asti's fiancée certainly made her popular. Having finished cleaning the blood, Bellatrix spoke casually. Looking at her niece's disheartened face, Bellatrix showed a mischievous smile. She knew how important it was for a proud girl to be the most popular at school. You can become popular too, just get into Asterian's bed, and you'll gain power, Bellatrix said with a cute smile on her lips. Doria felt her cheeks heat up at her aunt's bold proposal. Remember, dear niece, a black never bows to anyone. With that, she stood up and walked towards the room's exit. Where are you going? Doria asked. She didn't want to part from Bellatrix, the only woman she could seemingly trust. To bathe in goblin blood and listen to their sweet screams while I torture them. Looking over her shoulder, Bellatrix responded with a cold and somewhat crazy smile. Watching Bellatrix leave the room excited like a child going to play in the park, Doria murmured to herself. My aunt is crazy. Chapter 89, Civil War, 5. Death Eater attack on Gringotts. Closing the newspaper and placing it on the table, Asterion showed a thoughtful look. Voldemort attacked Gringotts to secretly recover Hufflepuff's cup, the attack on Gringotts was just a distraction. Voldemort must have already noticed the absence of two Horcruxes, Hufflepuff's cup and Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Asterion murmured to himself. At the same time, he must be worried about the safety of the other Horcruxes at Hogwarts, which I've already taken. He must be getting a bit paranoid at this point, Asterion continued to voice his thoughts with a cold smile on his lips. Asterion. Hearing his name called, the Black Heir looked towards the source of the voice and saw Narcissa looking at him with a worried and hesitant expression. Is something bothering you, Sissy? Asterion asked gently. Even a fool could see that Narcissa wanted something but was hesitant to ask. Clenching her fists, Narcissa bit her lips and opened her mouth but hesitated, remaining silent. Raising an eyebrow, he asked with a serious look, "Am I so unworthy of your trust, Sissy? I trust you, but you are a leader, and you cannot put feelings ahead of the interests of the entire group." Narcissa spoke as she sat down and smiled, though the smile was tinged with sadness and remorse. Seeing the proud and cold Narcissa acting this way, Asterion knew she was worried about her children. "If you are talking about Doria and Draco, you don't need to worry. I won't harm them. After all, it's not their fault they have a father with poor judgment." He spoke in a soft and gentle tone but ended with a hint of scorn for Lucius. "Thank you, Asterion. Truly, thank you." Moving forward, Narcissa hugged Asterion deeply and spoke with a voice full of emotion and tremors. Only she knew how many nights she couldn't sleep thinking about her children living in the same house as a monster like Voldemort. It terrified her. The idea of seeing her children return in coffins made her heart feel like it was being stabbed repeatedly. "Don't worry, they will be safe, I promise you that. But you need to focus. Today we have the meeting with Dumbledore to establish our preliminary alliance and set the terms for the future transfer of power." Patting Narcissa's back, Asterion spoke in a serious tone. Breaking from the hug, Narcissa nodded with renewed determination. She kissed Asterion on the cheek and left with hurried but firm steps. Suddenly, two girls entered the living room. He knew both of them. Daphne and Astoria, his future wife and future sister-in-law, respectively. Unlike her older sister, Astoria had darker blonde hair and green eyes, inherited from her mother, Helena. She was small, even for 12 years old, her complexion showing a sickly paleness. But even suffering from a terrible blood curse, the girl displayed a cheerful smile and a very light aura, almost as if she didn't care about her curse. "Still getting used to the mansion, Astoria?" As Daphne sat next to him, Asterion asked his young sister-in-law. "A bit too dark for my taste." Ignoring her sister's disapproving look, Astoria commented on the dark themes of the mansion. "But, a very cozy place." She spoke, looking playfully at her sister. "So, how far have you two gone?" With curiosity shining in her eyes, Astoria lowered her voice and asked eagerly. Daphne's pale cheeks turned red with her younger sister's intimate question. "Astoria." Embarrassed, Daphne looked shyly and angrily at her sister. "You are forbidden to read those books in your room." Pouting dissatisfied, Astoria rolled her eyes at her older sister and looked mischievously at Asterion, who remained silent, listening to the whole conversation with interest. "We just kissed." Faced with her gaze, Asterion responded indifferently. Boring Astoria lost interest almost instantly upon hearing that. She couldn't help but look at her sister with a disappointed look. That disappointed look made Daphne feel even more irritated. Getting up from the chair, she grabbed her sister and dragged her out of the living room regardless of the pleading words she heard. Asterion watched everything with an amused look. It was nice to relax like this before the real work began. A table was set in the middle of the room, on one side all the noble faction allied with House Black, on the other side, the entire light faction, led by Albus Dumbledore. As for the ministry employees in important positions, they were all ignored, including the current Minister of Magic. The Ministry of Magic would cease to exist, only those truly in power were important in this meeting. Another election would be held when everything normalized and all power was transferred to the new governing body, the Clock Tower. Asterion was not leading the entire negotiation. He left that to the veteran politicians of the pureblood faction like Aurelius, Arcturus, and others. At this moment, he was needed only as a symbol of power, just like Dumbledore on the other side of the table. "Let us begin." Dumbledore spoke with a gentle smile, his blue eyes behind the lenses of his glasses appearing especially kind at that moment. "Yes." Arcturus nodded, and everyone began to take their respective seats. Papers containing all relevant information were distributed equally to everyone present in the room. The hall echoed with the rustling of the pages. Dumbledore concentrated on reading. The first thing he noticed was the name. Clock Tower. The Hogwarts headmaster found the name oddly fitting for British society, but the next pieces of information made him sit up straighter. The entire legacy of the noble houses in one place, all the information of an entire civilization gathered for everyone to read regardless of origin. Even though he knew there was an enormous price to pay for such knowledge, Dumbledore still wanted to laugh joyfully. If such a proposal were implemented, England would be the only magical society in the world with such conditions for learning and centralization when it came to civilization. Calming the excitement in his heart, he continued to read attentively. 12 Lords. Dumbledore murmured as he reached the part about the distribution of powers. Department of General Fundamentals. Department of Individual Fundamentals. Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Department of Zoology. Department of International Magical Cooperation. Department of Botany. Department of Astromancy. Department of Creation. Department of Curses. Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Department of Magical Games and Sports. Department of Policies. He rhythmically tapped his fingers on the table. The number was much smaller than the seats in the Wizengamot, where all powers were divided almost equally. If the clock tower proposal were successfully approved, it meant that certain powers would have to be centralized in a few individuals, making them particularly powerful, a disadvantage in the fight against future corruption. On the other hand, with fewer departments, the entire legal system would be streamlined, making it more efficient in terms of internal control, although efficiency would be contested, as there wouldn't be as many filters in case of irregularities. But in the end, everything could be adjusted gradually, making the clock tower very suitable to replace the current Ministry of Magic, which was full of corruption and injustices. I presume the 12 Lords can delegate their powers, Dumbledore asked, removing his glasses. All 12 Lords can appoint senators to oversee each department, Arcturus replied with a cold tone, very different from Dumbledore's enthusiastic attitude. Senators, Dumbledore murmured with a gleam in his eyes. Honestly, each of the 12 Lords wielded much power, it was as if there were 12 kingdoms within one large empire, all coexisting with each other. But, looking at the number of nobles on the other side of the table, Dumbledore smiled. He perfectly understood why the clock tower proposal was put forward. The pure-blood faction would no longer have as many members occupying seats in the Wizengamot after this civil war. This meant that the pure-blood faction would no longer have the final say in the Ministry of Magic. Honestly, many might think Dumbledore should refuse this proposal and directly control the Ministry of Magic, but Dumbledore himself knew that if he did that, the entire British Wizarding Society would collapse. Tyranny would only sink this country into even more death, chaos, and despair. Everyone would go to war to maintain power, regardless of the dire consequences, further weakening the entire Wizarding Society as a whole. Politics was a mess. Dumbledore cursed mentally and looked at Asterion standing next to Arcturus, the orchestrator of everything happening today. Smiling gently at the boy, Dumbledore spoke. "Let's go over the terms, Lord Arcturus." With his words, the entire room shifted atmosphere. Gunpowder seemed to have been thrown into the air, ready to explode at any moment. The meeting continued with detailed discussions on each department's roles, responsibilities, and the selection process for the 12 Lords. Despite the formality of the proceedings, there was a palpable sense of anticipation and uncertainty in the room. For Asterion, this was just the beginning. The real challenge would be in the implementation and the inevitable resistance from those who were deeply entrenched in the old ways. But for now, the focus was on laying a strong foundation for what they hoped would be a new era of magical governance. Chapter 90, Civil War, 6. The Leaky Cauldron. "We're a joke, aren't we, Rufus?" said a woman, silver strands visible among her red hair. Her blue eyes seemed particularly tired with a touch of exhaustion. The 50-year-old woman had an aura of someone who had spent a long time in a position of power. "Don't be so melodramatic, Amelia." Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Aurors, drank his butterbeer and replied in a calm tone. "I'm not being melodramatic. We weren't called to such an important meeting, it feels like we're just trainee secretaries, despite the blood and sweat we've given for this country." Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, scoffed in a cold and sarcastic tone, with a touch of self-mockery. She looked around and saw everyone talking about the new governmental body that would rule over the country. They all seemed excited with a touch of hope for the future that awaited them. Amelia did not mock these people for their naivety, they could not know that it was just a fundamental exchange of interests between the factions that controlled British Wizarding Society. "Hypocrite Dumbledore!" Amelia whispered to herself as she drank her entire butterbeer in one gulp. "He did what he thought was best for us, Amelia." Seeing the state of his longtime friend, Rufus understood what she was feeling, but he focused on the future, an uncertain future that was to come. "I know, but it's still discouraging to know that decades of your work were thrown away like crumpled paper in a trash bin." Amelia spoke, her voice low and hoarse, very disheartened by all the recent events. Look on the bright side, you became one of the senators, reporting to only one of the 12 lords. Rufus tried to cheer up his friend, although he wasn't exactly good at comforting people in the first place. It was the least that old bastard could do. Amelia gritted her teeth, remembering the news that she had been demoted and would be under the command of one of Dumbledore's allies, as one of the 24 senators in the future Supreme Court. She felt she was just a moment away from punching that old wizard's special grade face. Especially with him speaking in that comforting and gentle tone, as if he were comforting her. And them. When Amelia mentioned them, Rufus's face turned indifferent and cold, a murderous intent accumulated over decades enveloping him, making the atmosphere particularly colder. Looking around and seeing that no one was paying attention to them, Rufus lowered his voice and whispered coldly, "They aren't killing like they did in the war 13 years ago, so the news of his return isn't known yet. Everyone is working to prevent the information from leaking, including the noble faction. The news of the Gringotts attack was given as a terrorist attack by the crazies from the Aurora Society. At least I'll get revenge on that crazy bitch for killing my fiancé." Amelia clenched her fists and spoke in a particularly cruel and cold tone. Rufus sighed at the mention of Amelia's fiancé. Carl had been his partner in the war 13 years ago, but unfortunately, he crossed paths with Bellatrix Lestrange. It was commonly known that the chance of surviving an encounter with Bellatrix was very low. The woman was practically a one-person army with her hundreds of powerful cursed spirits. Carl, unfortunately, met her. Rufus had to deliver Carl's remains, or at least what was left of him, to his family. Bellatrix had been particularly cruel to Carl, leaving him with only his head and a smiling face drawn in blood on his cheek. "Ghosts of the past always come back to haunt us," Rufus commented, letting out a heavy sigh. Amelia didn't respond and ordered a full mug of butterbeer. "Today, I'm only leaving this bar unconscious," she said, looking at Rufus with a cruel gaze. Seeing this look, Rufus let out another sigh and decided to join his old comrade in arms. "Another mug, Tom." Black Mansion, Arcturus's study. "So, how is the public reaction?" Asterion asked, sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed. "Somewhat mixed, but the majority support the change," Arcturus replied, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "Dumbledore's prestige is indeed great among the Muggle-born," finished the Black Patriarch. "If it were us, we might have a rebellion right now," Asterion said sarcastically. "We're not French, Asterion," Arcturus added with a hint of amusement in his tone. Asterion laughed at the joke. "Yes, compared to England, France had the rightful title of the City of Revolution. If you are a powerless commoner, these words mean nothing. But if you are a king, emperor, or president, these words mean the guillotine. Being a ruler of France means sitting on a throne of TNT ready to explode at any moment. Voldemort is hesitating to attack or reveal his presence." Flicking the ashes of his cigar into the ashtray, Arcturus commented in a puzzled tone. Arcturus and all the others might be confused, but Asterion knew that Voldemort was probably feeling cornered and extremely paranoid now with the loss of so many Horcrux. This gave Asterion a sadistic pleasure, imagining the man seeing eyes even on the walls, watching his every move. "Don't worry about Voldemort, let's focus on his allies. Let's cut down these noble houses as if someone were cutting off heads," Asterion said, raising his glass of whiskey and holding it up to the light, illuminating the liquid inside the glass. "Most of them are Death Eaters who escaped with Bella's breakout, they are all bankrupt and without any apparent power. All the gold, property, and shops in the names of these noble houses have been distributed among the noble and neutral factions." Arcturus nodded and replied. Compared to the war 13 years ago, this war was much easier. Economically and numerically, they had been on the winning side of the war since the civil conflict began. On the other hand, Voldemort and his Death Eaters had nothing but a few people and the money funded by the Malfoy house. This greatly benefited the Black House and all its allies, who had superior power, money, and strength in every sense. If it weren't for Voldemort being a special grade wizard, his entire fortress would have collapsed like a house of cards, and they would have won this war the following week. But there's something strange. Arcturus's words caught Asterion's attention, who looked at his great-grandfather, confused. "Other countries have become involved." Arcturus showed a cold look and spoke in a rather disdainful tone. "Which countries are secretly funding Voldemort?" Asterion asked, his eyebrows furrowed deeply. The intervention of other countries was something he did not expect. But thinking that a weakened England was better than a strong England internationally, Asterion was not very surprised by the intervention of these countries. Especially with England having 3 special grade wizards, with Albus Dumbledore considered the strongest in the world. Rose didn't have much reputation, but Asterion was different. He had personally exorcised 5 special grade spirits, which made his reputation quite high internationally. Germany and France, Arcturus replied, smoking his cigar. Asterion nodded. Both countries deeply hated Grindelwald and Dumbledore. Especially the German Minister of Magic, whose brother was killed in the war between the 2 powerful special grade wizards. Old ghosts always come back to haunt us. Arcturus blew a circle of smoke into the air and sighed helplessly. It doesn't matter, their involvement in our civil war gives us the loophole to retaliate without being sanctioned by other countries. Asterion showed a cold smile. Especially with the Geneva Convention next year, where all the special grade wizards will gather to discuss the new treaty. Arcturus nodded. Next year's convention would definitely be something interesting to watch. Chapter 93, Chapter 91, Battlefield, 1. Asterion and Arcturus chose the battlefield in a field not far from Scotland, not only to minimize damage but also to distance themselves from Diagon Alley. It would be foolish to fight in the economic center of the British Wizarding Society. The Civil War had become complicated, especially with Germany and France secretly sending money and people to work alongside Voldemort. To anyone else, these witches and wizards from other countries were nothing more than Voldemort sympathizers who joined the dark side to create an extremist society. But everyone involved knew that these witches and wizards were nothing more than agents sent by both countries to make the situation even more chaotic and filled with deaths. On top of a hill not far from the battlefield, Asterion sat in a chair, staring at the hill miles away. On that hill, he could sense Voldemort's magical aura, but neither Asterion nor Voldemort had moved. It seems he has learned his lesson. Seeing Voldemort had not moved to join the battle, Asterion murmured to himself. Pawns fight pawns and kings fight kings. This phrase holds especially true in this world, where wizards have a huge disparity in levels of power. Grade 3 wizards fight grade 3 wizards, and so on. This was an implicit tacit agreement among all those participating in this war. 13 years ago, Voldemort ignored this and went to the Potter house, fearing a mere baby, where he ended up dying due to a simple mistake and a mother's love. Asterion could feel the man's gaze on him but selectively ignored it. He watched the battlefield with a calm gaze. The quality of wizards between the Clock Tower and the Death Eaters was nearly equal, especially with the elites of both countries, Germany and France, participating in this civil war. The ministers of both countries did not hesitate to use their elites in this conflict. This turned a quick battle he planned with his allies into a war of attrition. Asterion could have quickly ended the war by killing Voldemort, but he chose not to. The reason was very simple: this war was beneficial to him. The longer the war lasted, the more he could extend his influence over the Clock Tower. This was also Dumbledore's thought. The longer the war dragged on, the more the pureblood faction would be weakened. So, whether it was Asterion or Dumbledore, both wanted this war to continue for a while longer. The gigantic plasma beam tore through the earth, sending shockwaves around. Bellatrix dodged a piercing spell and smiled gleefully. With a flick of her wrist, she moved her arm in a half-moon arc, and her wand released a burst of flames towards her opponent. Her black hair billowed through the orange flames. The opponent cast a protego, and using the time the shield bought him, he apparat to a safe distance, breathing heavily. Sweat trickled down the man's face as his brown eyes remained fixed on the woman in front of him. "Don't look at me like that, I'll feel flattered," Bellatrix said in a somewhat coy tone, in response to the man's intense gaze. Suddenly, Bellatrix's expression changed. Her hair stood on end, alerting her to danger. Without hesitation, she leaned back and watched as a blade sliced past her throat, leaving a trail of blood behind. Operating to maintain distance, Bellatrix observed the tall young man with black hair and blue eyes, staring at her with a particularly deadly and cold gaze. "That was dangerous, I didn't sense you," she said with a delighted look. Born with an extraordinary perception due to her simplified innate technique, she could sense anything magical within 100 meters. But she couldn't sense the young man in front of her. Her eyes could see him, but her senses told her no one was there. "Come to think of it, you look familiar." Looking at the young man's face, Bellatrix placed a finger on her lips and showed a cute and innocent expression, seemingly talking to herself. Then, her smile twisted into a sadistic and cruel grin. "By any chance, did I kill one of your relatives?" Neville clenched his fists and looked coldly at the torturer of his parents. His alchemical items, 2 daggers, spun deftly in his hands as he approached. Bellatrix smiled and recognized that look, it was the same look countless people had given her over the years, a look of hatred and repressed fury. Using her index finger to touch the blood on her neck, Bellatrix licked her own blood and smiled happily. "It's been a while since I've seen my own blood," she said cheerfully, unconcerned with the young man's approach. Neville advanced, his grip on the daggers tightening. He felt the same look he had faced when confronting Asterion, the deeply rooted disdain in his opponent's eyes. Contracting the muscles in his legs tightly, Neville stomped on the ground and disappeared from his spot, leaving the ground beneath him sunken. He reappeared in front of Bellatrix, his daggers slicing through the air towards her head and heart. With a broad smile on her lips, Bellatrix stepped back and dodged the attacks. In the next moment, she spun and kicked Neville's head with a swift and powerful kick charged with magical energy. Neville didn't dodge the kick, he grabbed her leg despite the impact that reverberated through his body. With his other hand, his dagger moved like a serpent writhing in the air. Bellatrix waved her hand, and a curtain of black smoke appeared in her palm. From it emerged a small bird. As the bird appeared, a strong gust of wind sent Neville's body flying backward, spinning in different directions. "You are physically strong, with extraordinary senses. Unfortunately, you have no magic," Bellatrix said as she looked at her dislocated wrist. She grabbed her left wrist and twisted it forcefully, setting the bones back in place. "You must be Frank and Alice's son," she said with a nostalgic smile. "We studied together at Hogwarts." Narrowing her eyes, she watched Neville get up without any injuries and spoke with a cheerful and sadistic tone. It was beautiful to hear her screams, begging for death. Neville, hearing this, spoke each word through clenched teeth. "You are a monster. How can you torture people like that and smile afterward?" Tilting her head to the side and showing a genuinely confused expression, she asked as if hearing a stupid question. "Isn't it obvious?" "Because it's fun," she finished with an innocent smile on her lips. "Monster, you are a monster, even more cursed than Asterion Black," Neville said coldly, assuming a fighting stance, a tender and youthful killing intent radiating around him. "What hypocrisy, do you realize you are fighting for the will of the sweet and lovely master?" Bellatrix spread her arms and spoke, dissatisfied with his words, more specifically, dissatisfied with his slander of Asterion. "He will die too when I kill you." Neville remained indifferent to Bellatrix's words. Hearing this, the smile on Bellatrix's face vanished completely. Behind her, numerous curtains of smoke unfolded. "How dare you threaten my master, you filthy half-blood! I'll kill you like one crushes an insect, you aborted wretch!" Raising her head, Bellatrix's beautiful face twisted with anger and fury. Chapter 94, Chapter 92, Battlefield, 2. Hundreds of cursed spirits, each more grotesque than the last, emerged from the smoke curtains emitting repugnant sounds. "Die!" With a wave of her hand, Bellatrix commanded all the cursed spirits to focus entirely on Neville, thousands of eyes staring fixedly at him. Neville couldn't see the cursed spirits, but he could feel them perfectly. He couldn't help but curl his lips. Bellatrix was furious, and that made him happy for the first time in many years. Tightening his grip on his daggers, which had the ability to cut through magical energy and negative magical energy, Neville didn't falter in the face of the horde of cursed spirits he could sense. On the contrary, he advanced toward Bellatrix, surrounded by cursed spirits. A massive centipede lunged forward, its hundreds of legs pounding against the ground as its open mouth drooled corrosive saliva. Neville spun his dagger in his hand and landed it on the centipede's carapace. Without hesitation, he plunged the dagger into the carapace and charged forward, tearing through the centipede's entire torso. Blood splattered everywhere. Before the cursed spirit could regenerate, Neville spun in the air and stomped with his extreme force on the centipede's head, causing it to explode and scatter blood and organs across the ground. He didn't stop, continuing to advance toward the next cursed spirit, plunging his daggers into cursed spirits while dodging numerous other attacks. With a cold smile, Bellatrix snapped her fingers, sacrificing one of the cursed spirits, causing it to explode near Neville. Neville didn't even have a chance to react before he was engulfed by the explosion of the cursed spirit. When the explosion subsided, Neville's figure was revealed. Red blood fell onto the earth. Neville, with a large portion of his body burned, breathed heavily as blood trickled from his forehead and left arm. His blue eyes fixed on the woman with black hair. "Is it hurting? If it is, I can wait for you to rest a bit, filthy abortion." Sitting on a grotesque worm, Bellatrix crossed her legs and asked with a cold smile. "Think of it as my mercy for Alice's son." Neville took a deep breath. Every word that came out of that woman's filthy mouth made him furious. He found Asterion Black irritating, but he discovered that Bellatrix was even more unbearable. At this moment, he just wanted to shove his daggers into that woman's mouth and rip her tongue out. The descendant of the Longbottom House calmed himself and focused on the moment. He needed to be quick, quicker than ever before. Any cursed spirit could explode and kill him on the spot. Neville tensed all the muscles in his body, hardening them like never before. The blood flow in his body began to accelerate, and his heartbeat increased. Feeling his body burning from within, Neville opened his mouth and exhaled a hot, scalding breath. In the next moment, he took a step forward. The world blurred in Neville's eyes, making it difficult to see anything clearly, even with his extraordinary senses. Nevertheless, his eyes never left Bellatrix. At that moment, Neville Longbottom's speed reached an incredible 10 times the speed of sound. Perhaps in the entire history of the wizarding world, he was the only one to achieve such abysmal speeds without using a single drop of magical energy. Shush! It was like an arrow tearing through everything in its path, cursed spirits or not. Any cursed spirit was cut in half in the blink of an eye. A large amount of purple and green blood spread across hundreds of meters. Neville arrived in front of her, his dagger pointed directly at Bellatrix's throat. Die! Neville shouted angrily, ignoring the muscles torn apart by the exorbitant speed he had reached. Bellatrix didn't even have time to react before her throat was stabbed. Even with her throat impaled, Bellatrix unconsciously moved her hand and reached for Neville's abdomen. Bellatrix's world seemed to slow down, her body, mind, and soul seemed clearer than ever before. In that instant, she managed to achieve what many wizards would never accomplish in their lifetimes. She cast a spell without a wand. Maxima Bombarda. As the wandless and incantationless spell was cast, magical energy tore through reality, making the impossible possible. A fleeting glow appeared in her palm, and a ball of blue energy tore through Neville's skin, exploding organs and bones. Boom! Both were thrown backward by the explosion. A large amount of blood flowed from Bellatrix's throat, but she showed no fear or remorse. On the contrary, she let out a lively, fun-filled laugh. Her clothes were almost all blown off, revealing a large portion of her nudity and severe burns on certain parts of her body. Neville was in an even worse condition. In addition to the severe burns covering his body, half of his right abdomen was missing, leaving a huge hole where his stomach used to be. A large amount of blood flowed from the mortal wound. 2 loud snaps, similar to car exhausts, sounded on their battlefield. An old man wearing a blue robe and a long white beard pointed directly at the fallen Bellatrix while checking Neville Longbottom's condition. Beside Bellatrix, a teenager appeared, looking coldly at Dumbledore. Asterion looked at Bellatrix's deplorable state, the pentagram in his eyes revealing a gleam. A hologram of Bellatrix's body appeared in his mind, with at least 100 areas highlighted in red, indicating some kind of injury. Over 100 broken bones, severely damaged organs, and a gaping wound in the carotid artery. Knowing his cousin's injuries, he grabbed a very expensive potion, made by Nicholas Flamel himself. He opened the potion and poured the liquid onto her neck wound, which was the most severe of her injuries. A large amount of white smoke was emitted as the liquid came into contact with the blood and the wound. Unconcerned with Dumbledore and the wretched abortion that was dead in his eyes, Asterion took the still conscious Bellatrix in his arms, his touch as gentle as possible, afraid of worsening her injuries. Bellatrix coughed violently and looked affectionately at Asterion, speaking in a hoarse, trembling voice. "My Prince Charming came to rescue me." Asterion rolled his eyes. He didn't expect Bellatrix to still be able to joke in such a serious situation. "Look at your condition, you almost died," Asterion reproached his cousin as he hugged her slightly tighter. "You should have seen that filthy abortion," Bellatrix replied, unbothered by being reprimanded, her tone weak and tired. No longer wanting to speak to this mad woman, Asterion operated away, leaving Dumbledore to try to save Neville's life. Chapter 95, Chapter 93 Conflicts on the Battlefield, 1. Placing Bellatrix gently on the bed, Asterion sat beside her and gently moved the black hair that was covering her face to the side, looking directly into her green eyes. His red eyes staring directly into hers. "What? Want to make love?" Even with hundreds of broken bones and severely injured, Bellatrix asked with an ambiguous smile on her lips. She licked her dry lips with dried blood, looking at him with growing anticipation in her eyes. Asterion rolled his eyes and replied in a calm and serene tone. "What happened that night won't happen again, Bella. I won't betray my future wife again. Bellatrix pouted and spoke with a voice full of dissatisfaction. That didn't stop you from sleeping with me the other time. Stroking her cheek, Asterion responded with the same even tone. I was shaken by the news of Arcturus's death. Honestly, after sleeping with Bellatrix, Asterion felt a bit unworthy of Daphne. He hated betrayal and did what he hated the most, betraying someone who had given him their full trust. He regretted betraying Daphne, even if it was at such a delicate moment when he received the news that he would have to kill Arcturus. That makes you better than my ex-husband, Bellatrix murmured to herself, noticing the look in his eyes. Taking Lucius out of the equation, anyone is better than your husband, Asterion laughed and replied with a slight tone of amusement. Bellatrix also laughed at the joke and replied with another joke, or if it could be called a joke in the first place. I would have killed the mistresses and cooked them and made him eat them. It would have been hilarious to see his expression when I told him what he ate. Asterion pursed his lips hearing that. Bellatrix's sense of humor was as bizarrely bizarre as before. Letting out a tired sigh, Asterion spoke with a helpless tone. Please, refrain from making people cannibals, this world is dirty enough. Yes, master, Bellatrix replied with a serious look, then smiled innocently like a child asking for permission to buy a toy they saw. But can I continue to kill? Yes, but only enemies, Asterion nodded and continued with an extremely serious expression. When you're moderately healed, return to Voldemort's camp and start the plan. Bellatrix's smile stretched from ear to ear, a creepy smile full of sadistic feeling. Time to start the game, she whispered to herself with an excited look. Seeing Bellatrix excited, Asterion shook his head and called Narcissa through the cursed spirit he had placed to protect her. The doors of the room were almost immediately opened, and Narcissa entered with a worried look. Looking at her sister so severely injured in bed, Narcissa's heart almost burst in her chest. Who hurt her? Narcissa asked, her tone tinged with a coldness capable of freezing the Arctic again. Frank and Alice's son. He was quite strong for a magicless abortion, Bellatrix replied excitedly, ignoring the atmosphere hovering in the room. But you should see the state I left him in. Dumbledore is probably burying him at this exact moment. Bellatrix smiled brightly, recalling the maximum bombarda that destroyed the organs of the filthy abortion. Giving Bella a kiss on the cheek, Asterion got up from the bed, walked over to Narcissa, and also gave her a kiss on the cheek. Sissy, don't fully heal Bella, I'll be returning to the battlefield. Narcissa nodded and watched as he dissipated out of the room. You seem like a child, always causing more and more trouble. Looking at her sister in bed, Narcissa sighed as she sat beside her. I was under orders from my master, Bellatrix retorted, very dissatisfied with being called a child. I know you, Bellatrix Black, Narcissa rolled her eyes at her sister. You just want to cause more chaos and destruction, it's always been like that since you were little. Bellatrix pouted hearing this, but didn't deny her words. It wasn't exactly a lie. Fortunately, her master knew she didn't like boring missions and always ordered her to the most fun missions, like being a double agent or starting a beautiful massacre to start a good day. I'll get the potions, how much do you want to heal? Narcissa asked, frowning as she looked at Bellatrix's wounds, especially the large burns on her skin. If Bellatrix were a muggle, she would have to live marked with these burns for her entire life. Fortunately, nothing that a potion couldn't fix. Leave the burns and some dozen broken bones, Bellatrix replied indifferently, as if she didn't care at all about her own injuries. Narcissa nodded, kissed Bella's cheek affectionately, and got off the bed, walking towards the door. She stopped and turned to look at Bellatrix with a serious look. Don't die, Bella. I don't want to bury another relative. You don't need to worry about me, Miss Perfect Lady. You should be worrying about my enemies. They will suffer while I kill them one by one, all to fulfill the orders of my lovely master. Bellatrix flashed a smirk and replied with an increasingly excited voice. Narcissa let out a tired sigh upon hearing this. Take care of yourself, Bella. With that said, she left the room. Bellatrix silently watched Narcissa's back and then turned her gaze to the ceiling, where she pondered many things before closing her eyes to rest for a while. Battlefield, Clock Tower Camp. As Asterion returned to the camp, successive explosions reverberated in the sky accompanied by strong tremors. They were level 1 wizards officially appearing on the battlefield. Lord Black. Asterion turned and looked at his future father-in-law, Aurelius Greengrass. As he had imagined earlier, with the support of the neutral faction, Aurelius had currently become one of the 12 lords of the Clock Tower, the lord of the Department of Botany. Lord Greengrass. The Black Heir greeted him back with some respect in his tone. After all, he was his father-in-law. But even though he tried to respect the man, Asterion wasn't someone who flattered people, it was quite the opposite, people flattered him. Asterion began to walk and gestured for Aurelius to walk beside him. With the entry of level 1 wizards into the battlefield, we are gradually gaining the advantage, the Death Eaters are increasingly cornered. We estimate that the Dark Lord's forces won't hold out for much longer. Arriving by his future son-in-law's side, Aurelius began to explain the current situation of the battlefield. You don't need to worry about Voldemort entering the battlefield, the man absolutely won't initiate a direct confrontation with me and Albus Dumbledore present in the camp. Asterion spoke, after a brief silence, but as he was about to finish his sentence, he was interrupted by a gigantic needle coming towards him. But before the nearly 30-meter-long needle could approach Asterion, Aurelius beside him simply created a gigantic chain of wind, changing the trajectory of the huge needle, causing it to collide with the ground. When the needle collided with the ground, it created a huge crater accompanied by a thunderous sound that echoed throughout the camp. A cloud of dust spread to the sides. Naturally, all this commotion caught the attention of countless people in the camp. What is the meaning of this, Matriarch Longbottom? Aurelius asked with a voice full of authority mixed with a touch of anger. Anyone would be furious to be attacked so suddenly, and Aurelius was no different from anyone else in this aspect. He looked at the old lady, her eyes red from crying so much, with a confused look. He didn't understand why Lady Matriarch Longbottom had attacked. Augusta didn't even bother to look at Aurelius, her swollen and almost crazed eyes were fixed on Asterion. In that gaze, fury, resentment, hatred, and malice mingled, creating a look that sent a chill down Aurelius's spine as he stood beside her, facing that gaze. What would someone need to feel to demonstrate such a look? Aurelius didn't know, and he didn't need to know. He wanted his sanity intact for a long time. You monster, your cursed family, my dear Neville, Augusta murmured, looking at Asterion. She bit her own lips so hard that blood stained her lips. She raised her wand and pointed with her trembling hand. Augusta. Before the matriarch could start her attack again, a small figure appeared beside her and unexpectedly snatched the wand from Matriarch Longbottom's hand. Asterion looked at Professor Flitwick with a surprised look. He thought the man was dead, as he hadn't seen him for months after the attack on Hogwarts. But seeing the half-goblin alive and well in front of him, it was obvious that Phileas Flitwick had survived Voldemort, which was a great achievement. However, looking at Professor Flitwick's empty left shirt sleeve, it was obvious that a price had been paid for him to survive an attack by a level special wizard. Which was an insignificant price compared to life itself. Turning his gaze back to Augusta Longbottom, looking at her state of hysteria, Asterion wondered, had Neville Longbottom died? Chapter 96, Chapter 94 Conflicts on the Battlefield, 2. More and more people began to gather around, all looking at Asterion and Augusta with curious looks. Asterion presumed that Neville had indeed died from Augusta's reaction. This made him feel mixed emotions, of regret and sadness to be more exact. He felt regret for not killing Neville earlier, and how he would have liked to have Neville on his dissection table. As for sadness, he felt sad for not seeing Neville's reaction when he destroyed the Longbottom house. Although I don't know the reason behind this attack, you have to face consequences, especially for attacking your commander. Casually dusting off his shoulders due to the attack, Asterion spoke calmly, his red eyes staring directly into the eyes of Matriarch Longbottom. A tense atmosphere spread among all those who were watching. No one spoke against Asterion's words, not because he was the strongest, but because he was right. There is no army in the world where a soldier can try to kill his commander and walk away without consequences. Lord Black. Seeing things getting increasingly tense, Phileas intervened before things got even worse. Asterion looked at his professor and nodded in greeting. It pleases me to see you alive, Professor Flitwick. I appreciate your words, but please, do not punish Lady Augusta severely. She is suffering from the condition of her grandson, who is on the verge of death because of his fight with Bellatrix Lestrange. Phileas spoke with a serious tone and looked at his brightest student with an almost pleading look. Phileas himself knew that it was impossible for Augusta to get out of this situation without consequences. After all, if such a thing were not punished, it would set a very wrong example to all the soldiers on the battlefield, who could break the rules and not suffer the proper consequences. Listening to the words of the half-goblin, everyone around understood the root of the conflict. They looked at Augusta with pity, but no one spoke up to help her. After all, instead of attacking Bellatrix herself, Augusta attacked their commander. Asterion had quite a bit of prestige in the army, just his presence on the battlefield made everyone feel safer because with Asterion present, Voldemort wouldn't attack the weaker soldiers on the battlefield. So everyone had a lot of respect for the 13-year-old. With Filius's words, Asterion himself knew that Neville was alive, although still in critical condition. Remembering the grave state Bellatrix left Neville in, the Black Heir felt it was a miracle Neville was still alive. Dumbledore must have paid a hefty price to keep the young man alive, despite Neville having half of his organs due to Bellatrix's maximum bombarda. Looking at Filius and then at the people around, Asterion pondered. Everyone could hear Filius's words, so if he were too harsh with the punishment, it would affect his image. Something he didn't want, especially after gaining so much prestige and gradually clearing the infamy of the Black House. Lady Augusta will have to go to the battlefield and prove her worth. If she refuses the assigned task, she will have to face the tribunal with serious consequences for attacking the acting commander. Asterion spoke, after a brief silence, delivering the verdict. It wasn't a very severe punishment, but due to Augusta's advanced age, it was a particularly dangerous punishment. When everyone heard, no one found it excessive, although Lady Longbottom's advanced age was a particularly serious issue, nothing that reinforcement magic couldn't help with. Filius also relaxed with the words. In his mind, he was already prepared to hear Augusta's death sentence, but any reduction in punishment was a victory in his eyes. Throughout the process, Augusta Longbottom never took her eyes off Asterion's figure, as if she wanted to engrave his image in the depths of her mind, so she would never forget him. Asterion didn't care about her gaze, he wanted her to remember him, as he would be the last face she would see before death came to reap her soul. That he would ensure happened with much pain and sadism. "Good job, Aurelius," who had been beside Asterion the whole time, murmured with a look of satisfaction on his face. His son-in-law did an excellent job with Augusta, not letting anger cloud his judgment. Although severely punishing Augusta would have a better impact on the pure-blood faction, it would bring a certain infamy to Asterion. Even if small, it was such things that made people not trust you. A stern and fair image was much more well-received than a cold and emotionless commander, which would greatly help his son-in-law's future and consequently Daphne's. "Let's start pressing the battlefield, Lord Greengrass. If we continue in this stalemate, morale may begin to decline, especially when there is no significant victory." Asterion, walking towards the main tent of the camp, spoke to the man beside him. Aurelius nodded. Asterion was right, this war had been going on for almost a month, during which time seeing the death of comrades had brought a tense and heavy atmosphere to the entire camp. They had to achieve a significant victory to boost army morale, otherwise, victory would be an uncertain factor in the future. "I will speak with Dumbledore so that the semi-special grade wizards can enter the battlefield," Aurelius replied with a serious look. The pure-blood faction didn't have many semi-special grade wizards compared to the light faction. The pure-blood faction was only more powerful because of Arcturus, who was worth 3 or 4 semi-special grade wizards with his cursed spirits. In comparison, Dumbledore could mobilize at least 4 semi-special grade wizards like Minerva McGonagall, Filius Flitwick, Aberforth Dumbledore, and Alastor Moody, all prestigious wizards and witches in the British community. Asterion nodded at his words and entered the tent. Inside, the space had been expanded with an expansion spell, making the interior of the tent as large as a mansion. Inside, almost all the wizards and witches working in logistics were working with a serious and concentrated look. In the center of the tent was a rectangular table with dozens of chairs. Of these dozens of chairs, at least half were occupied. 2 main chairs were at the end of the table, and in one of them, Albus Dumbledore was sitting, calmly sipping tea. Seeing Asterion sitting beside him, he spoke with a curious look. It was very noisy outside. Asterion rolled his eyes at the man's acting. It was obviously his fault, but he was acting all curious as if he didn't know anything. A truly hypocritical man, that was Albus Dumbledore. A grandmother saddened by the critical condition of her grandson, Asterion replied calmly, looking directly into the eyes of the Hogwarts headmaster. "A pity what happened to young Neville. Bellatrix Lestrange was extremely cruel and insidious." Dumbledore sighed sadly, his voice low and full of sorrow for Neville's cruel fate. Asterion again rolled his eyes at the man's shameless words. Neville had been even crueler to Bellatrix, not only breaking hundreds of bones but also stabbing a dagger into his cousin and subordinate's neck. If he hadn't arrived in time and used a rare healing potion made from phoenix tears, Bellatrix would be dead by now. "Will he survive?" Asterion asked after a brief silence. His gaze showed curiosity about Neville's condition. He didn't believe Dumbledore's words at all, the man owned a phoenix. It could be said that as long as you had a phoenix, you were practically immortal. Yes, but with serious sequelae, Dumbledore nodded with a serious and sorrowful expression. Asterion internally scoffed at his words but remained silent. He turned his gaze to everyone sitting at the table and spoke calmly. Let's begin the strategic meeting. Chapter 97, Chapter 95, The War Intensifies, 1. The atmosphere of the war had not spread throughout Great Britain. The clock tower had controlled the course of the war to prevent it from spreading too far, so almost all of England seemed unaffected by this civil war. Well, partly because Voldemort was losing and did not want to divide his already scarce troops. Hogwarts. Rose, wait for me. Hermione quickly caught up with Rose, carrying a second-year spellbook in her arms. Don't be slow, my own, let's get to the library, Rose said without looking at her friend, continuing toward the library with hurried steps. She was swamped with homework due to her private lessons with Dumbledore. The man was not going easy on her, especially with the tons of homework he was giving her. Honestly, if she didn't have the six eyes and the ability to process information extremely quickly, she wouldn't be able to keep up with Dumbledore's insane teaching pace. Sometimes Rose thought Dumbledore was in a hurry to teach her as quickly as possible, as if he might die at any moment. Upon arriving at the library, Rose and Hermione found Ron studying. This made both girls think they were under some illusion spell. Ron Weasley studying in the library. This would certainly be surprising news that would spread throughout Hogwarts. Rose no longer felt the animosity toward the boy she had at the beginning of the school year. She saw that although Ron was somewhat tactless about certain matters, he was a decent boy with a good heart. Hermione, on the other hand, upon seeing the boy, snorted coldly, glaring at the redhead. Throughout her time at Hogwarts, Ron was the person she argued with the most. Besides being insulted with nicknames like Bookworm and other degrading names, she was insulted only for wanting to help the boy speak some spells correctly. After that, Hermione and Ron were officially mortal enemies. They didn't like each other and didn't hide their animosity. Rose just laughed at her friend's reaction. She knew Hermione didn't like the boy, so she didn't greet him despite his obvious attempt to approach her. Despite her wishes, as soon as they sat down at the table and placed their books on it, Ron approached them, undeterred by the death glare he was receiving from Hermione. Rose. Ron said but hesitated to continue. He finally mustered the courage to ask, "Can you help my dad get his job back at the ministry?" Rose was truly taken aback by the red-haired boy's request. She really didn't expect Ron to ask her something like that. Clock Tower, Hermione corrected Ron's words. Ron was surprised by the correction and glared at the girl with thick brown hair. No one liked being corrected by others, especially a teenager. "No one asked you, Bookworm," Ron said almost instinctively, his tone irritated, not caring about Hermione's particularly calm gaze. After experiencing a real war and seeing people die, Hermione had matured a lot. Perhaps in the past, she would have been upset and hurt by the insults, but now she saw how childish and extremely spoiled Ron was. "Do you think I'm offended by that? You need to read the dictionary more, Ronald." Hermione opened the second-year spellbook and subtly returned the insult, calling him stupid for not coming up with a better word to insult her. Ron's cheeks flushed with Hermione's words, anger and shame making him look at her with a gaze full of rage, ready to draw his wand at any moment. "Let's not fight, the librarian is looking our way." Seeing Ron's face turn a shade similar to his hair, as if he were about to explode, Rose spoke to calm things down. She didn't want to be kicked out of the library again. Hermione and Ron exchanged glares in a battle of stares, but both relented and remained silent. "I don't think you need to worry about your father's job. Headmaster Dumbledore wouldn't stand by while one of his colleagues needed help," Rose whispered to Ron, feeling the cold stare of the librarian on their group for a moment. Rose's words and the mention of Dumbledore seemed to calm Ron's tension, as his shoulders relaxed and he showed a happy and relieved expression again. Almost as if Dumbledore's name was a very effective calming agent. "Did you hear? They say the war has become even fiercer on the battlefield." Ron lowered his voice and shared the information he had gotten from other students. Seeing Ron sit down and start talking to Rose, Hermione's eyes narrowed. She couldn't believe someone could be so shameless. Didn't he see the two piles of books next to Rose? Clearing her throat, Hermione gave Ron a dissatisfied look, growing even more frustrated as he ignored her and continued talking to Rose. "We're busy, Ronald." Hermione couldn't take the whispers disrupting her concentration any longer and spoke sharply, drawing the attention of almost everyone in the library. Miss Granger, silence, or you'll be expelled from the library. Irma Pants, the librarian, looked at Hermione and spoke in a reprimanding tone. Hermione, who had always been the exemplary student to the teachers, felt a wave of embarrassment as she noticed the eyes falling on her. Sitting back down, she glared at Ron with a vengeful and malicious look. Even Ron swallowed hard in the face of that deadly look, as if it promised revenge. Rose couldn't help but curl her lips into an amused smile. She felt that this was the school life she wanted, just silly and meaningless fights. For a moment, she wished that every day could be like this. Shaking her head to clear these unrealistic thoughts, Rose focused on her reading, occasionally jotting down relevant notes in a notebook. Battlefield Death Eater camps. Everyone watched Bellatrix limping toward the main tent with shocked eyes. Although Bellatrix was crazy, no one ever questioned her strength. Seeing her in this state made everyone feel a chill run down their spines. Deep in the hearts of each one, the seed of desertion began to grow. If the powerful Bellatrix was so injured in this war, imagine them, mere wizards and witches of grades 3 and 2. Even the Aurors from France and Germany frowned. They had come to participate in this war to weaken Dumbledore's forces, but the way this war was going, they would die on this foreign land before even completing their respective missions. Bellatrix didn't care about the eyes falling on her. She held her head high and walked proudly despite being in a relatively grave condition. She walked to the main tent and entered, finding the Dark Lord sitting in a chair holding Nagini. A black diary lay on the table in front of him. His red eyes, which reminded her of Asterian's, stared at her with a cold and calm gaze. "My master," Bellatrix kneeled, ignoring her body protesting in pain. "I see you are suffering, Bellatrix," Voldemort commented, stroking Nagini's scaly head. His gaze fell on the visible burns on her arms and legs. He, Bellatrix laughed joyfully. Despite the excruciating pain she was feeling, her lips curled into a cold smile. "You should see the other side, master. I left a huge hole in his stomach." Voldemort nodded, not doubting her words. He knew his loyal subordinate well. "We will be starting," he said, drawing Bellatrix's attention. "Recover yourself and begin. You and 3 other Grade 1 wizards will attack Diagon Alley," Voldemort ordered, a strange gleam in his eyes, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table in front of him. Fear, he needed fear to turn this war in their favor. Bellatrix nodded and didn't question him, although she was clearly confused. Removing 4 Grade 1 wizards from the battlefield at this moment would leave a huge gap in their defenses, exposing their flanks too much to the enemy. "Yes, my master," Bellatrix replied and stood up, preparing to leave. However, she halted her steps upon hearing Voldemort's voice again. "Bellatrix, you won't betray me, will you?" The cold, hissing voice sent shivers down her spine. Bellatrix looked over her shoulder with a cheerful smile. "I will never betray my true master," she said, her voice tinged with insane fanaticism. Voldemort looked at her and nodded, a satisfied expression on his face. "Dumbledore and Asterian, you don't want others getting involved, but this is war. By nature, war is cruel and treacherous. And war is always written by the victors," Voldemort murmured, staring directly into Nagini's serpentine eyes. The male Dictus simply hissed as if responding to her master. Chapter 98, Chapter 96, The War Intensifies, 2. At 9:15 in the morning, when Diagon Alley was bustling with witches and wizards going about their daily shopping, a massive explosion sounded. Boom! After the attack on Gringotts, Diagon Alley was once again attacked. The blast shattered all the windows and storefronts along the street, sending sharp shards of glass raining down. Terrified screams echoed through the commercial hub, followed by people running without regard for one another. In a moment of fear and desperation, humans and wizards were not so different, both ran for their lives. One of the Death Eaters pointed his wand to the sky and incanted a spell. Mors Mordra. In the sky, a gigantic green skull with a serpent emerging from its mouth appeared, making some older individuals feel as if they had returned to the hell of the war 13 years ago. Bellatrix, now healed, pointed her wand at the street filled with witches and wizards with a cruel smile. She flicked her wrist and silently cast a spell. Bombarda Maxima. An invisible spell shot from the tip of her wand, and in the next moment, boom! Bellatrix's black hair was blown back by the forceful winds of the explosion. She narrowed her eyes, a sadistic smile on her lips. A scene worthy of being mistaken for hell unfolded before her. Faced with such destructive power, hundreds of people turned into a cloud of blood, painting the walls and ground. It all happened in an instant, no one had time to react or counterattack. The other 3 Grade 1 wizards showed no mercy either and began to bombard all of Diagon Alley. A greater pandemonium had erupted in the magical commercial centre of England. When the Aurors arrived moments after the attack, they were met with a horrific scene. Even the veterans, who had seen it all, averted their eyes from the gruesome and cruel display. The younger Aurors couldn't bear it and vomited everything they had eaten that morning. It took a while for everyone to compose themselves and start protecting people and counter-attacking the Death Eaters. Rufus, head of the Aurors, even after the dissolution of the Ministry of Magic, pointed his wand at one of the Death Eaters, and a life-and-death battle ensued. The veteran Auror seemed like a deadly machine, unleashing spell after spell without giving his opponent room to breathe. Everything around them was torn apart by the magic, brutally ripping through houses and entire buildings. Other Aurors who were not as strong as Rufus, gathered into a formation and attacked the other Death Eaters. Even though they could not truly kill the opponent, they could fight for hours like this, delaying the enemies until reinforcements arrived. Bellatrix was trapped by 10 Aurors. She dodged a spell and used Protego the next moment to protect herself from the enemy's spells. She did not use her cursed spirits, not because she felt sorry for the Aurors, but on orders from Voldemort. She was ordered not to destroy Diagon Alley, only cause death and chaos. This greatly limited her means of attacks. Blocking the more than 20 golden Expelliarmus thrown, Bellatrix knew she couldn't go on like this. Even though she was a Grade 1 witch, she did not have infinite magical energy. At the same time, the worry of reinforcements arriving at any moment made her quicken her steps. Dodging a Confundus, Bellatrix turned her wrist and launched an Expelliarmus at the Auror, catching him by surprise and throwing him back with force, but she didn't stop there. Reinforcing her body with 20% of her magical energy, she stomped heavily onto the ground. The ground sank 1 meter into the ground and strong tremors occurred every 20 meters, throwing the Aurors off balance. Bellatrix took her chance and apparat to one of the houses above and ran across the roofs of the houses. The Aurors followed her, still maintaining a strict military training, always casting spells to get in Bellatrix's way. While running across the rooftops, Bellatrix stopped and spun in the air dodging the spells. When she was about to fall back onto the rooftops, she spun upside down in the air and used the hand that touched the roof to gain momentum again. Using her other hand, she aimed her wand at one of the Aurors and made a half-moon movement, as if cutting something invisible. Across the street, on top of the roof of a house, the Auror didn't even have time to react before being cut in half by a Diffindo spell. His body split into 2, with his upper body slipping and falling, leaving only his lower body still standing. Blood, viscera, and organs stained the entire roof. Seeing the death of their comrade in arms, the Aurors attacked even more strongly, full of anger and hatred appearing on their faces. As Bellatrix once again continued to stall for time, the battle between Rufus and the Death Eater came into full swing. The entire street was completely unrecognizable, with charred walls and houses in complete ruin. Meanwhile, both wizards continued to exchange spells for 5 consecutive minutes. Spell after spell, blow after blow, both faced each other putting their lives at risk. Whoever made the first mistake would die. Snap! A sound resembling a car's exhaust echoed not far away. Gregory Goyle, patriarch of the Goyle house, almost instantly cast a spell towards the origin of the sudden noise. The spell pierced through the air and hit the location of the sound, but it didn't hit anyone. Without hesitation, Gregory retreated while skillfully blocking every spell cast by Rufus. Meanwhile, his eyes scanned the surroundings for any wizard. The patriarch of the Goyle house was absolutely certain he had heard someone operating, and he trusted his instincts. There was someone present besides him and Rufus Scrimgeour. Suddenly, every hair on Gregory's body stood on end as he sensed imminent danger. The feeling that death was looming over him caused a significant change in the patriarch's expression. What frightened Gregory the most was that no matter how much he distanced himself, the sense of danger didn't diminish, on the contrary, it grew stronger with each passing moment. He wanted to apparate away, but apparating wasn't instantaneous. Though there was only a small window of time until the spell was successfully executed, 0.5 seconds was enough for an experienced wizard like Rufus to kill. Then, a drastic change in the situation occurred. Gregory watched in slow motion, unbelieving, as his chest was pierced by a spell, and his heart exploded. With widened eyes, the small figure of Phileas was revealed before Gregory, who looked at the half-blood he considered filthy with a mix of rage and fear. Filthy before he could finish speaking, his head was blown off by a bombarda used by the Hogwarts professor. Phileas might have lost to Voldemort, but to any other grade 1 wizard or witch, he was a deadly nightmare. Mr. Scrimgeour, I will continue hunting down the Death Eaters. Take the time to assist those in need. Phileas turned to Rufus, who looked at him with respect, and spoke with a serious and courteous tone. Have they sent reinforcements? Rufus asked, looking at the small man before him. No. With the gap in Voldemort's defences, all grade 1 wizards and above have attacked with full force. Phileas shook his head, informing Rufus about the ongoing situation in the main battlefield at that moment. Rufus didn't ask anything further. Once Phileas finished killing all the grade 1 wizards, he would use his auras to initiate rescues and aid. Seeing that Rufus had no more questions, Phileas disappeared before Rufus's eyes. Chapter 99, Chapter 97, The Death of Voldemort, 1. The attack by the Death Eaters on Diagon Alley caused a dark cloud to cover all of England. Fear, which had not manifested since the beginning of the war, exploded all at once. People began to leave the country en masse, making the situation extremely complex. Upon seeing the low morale of the soldiers in the camp, Asterian's face became extremely grim. A pentagram appeared in his eyes, reflecting his feelings at that moment. The entire sense of security and the belief that the war was under control, which he and Dumbledore had created, was shattered by the attack on Diagon Alley. Fear and uncertainty completely reversed the morale on the battlefield. Even the victory of advancing on the battlefield did not change this feeling. Even the death of 3 level 1 wizards on the Death Eaters' side did not change anything. The death of hundreds of witches and wizards in Diagon Alley made uncertainty cloud everyone's thoughts on the battlefield, and they wondered if their families would be the next victims. This was a common concern in the minds of almost everyone. Asterian knew he had to do something to boost morale, otherwise, even if this war was won, the image of the clock tower would be one of weakness and incapacity. Technically, Dumbledore, with his incomparable prestige in the soldiers' minds, was the most suitable to boost morale, but since he was not at the camp, this role fell on the shoulders of the Heir of Black. But Asterian was not very good with words, so instead of giving an epic and motivating speech to all the soldiers, he used actions instead of pretty words. He would kill Voldemort at that moment, promoting that the clock tower was powerful and could guide England to a better future. Below Asterian, a curtain of black smoke manifested, and Nidhogg emerged from the portal with his master on his head. The enormous crimson dragon rose to the skies, attracting the attention of everyone, be it the soldiers of the clock tower or the Death Eaters. Even the war that was happening at that moment on the battlefield completely ceased. The brutal and terrifying appearance of the enormous oriental dragon made the Death Eaters feel insignificant before that brutal force of nature. With the enormous dragon winding through the sky, Asterian above Nidhogg's head slowly closed his eyes and felt. Because of his innate technique, he could sense negative magical energy, and in his senses, the entire battlefield and England were filled with negative magical energy bubbling like soup in a cauldron. Like a maestro, he extended his hands forward and moved them. Before the eyes of thousands of witches and wizards, all the blue negative magical energy on the battlefield transformed into rivers of icy blue energy and flowed toward the sky, precisely to Asterian atop Nidhogg. He continued, molding this energy into a cruel and cold melody, where parents bury their children and children bury their fathers, a song of hatred, resentment, and fear, an endless cycle of hatred where both sides killed each other on the whimsical orders of others. War. The cursed spirit began to take shape as Asterian poured more of his desires into the core of the cursed spirit. Soon, a gigantic figure appeared above the battlefield. Piercing through its skull was the body of a gun, below which was a grotesque mouth full of teeth resembling knives. Its hands were rifles and machine guns, its chest was strong and broad with bones protruding outward, and instead of legs, it had bullet belts swaying in the wind. When the cursed spirit fully manifested in the sky, a malevolent and cold feeling spread through the surroundings. The immense amount of negative magical energy subtly changed the environment, bringing an incomparable chill. Even the Death Eaters hugged themselves, trying to seek some warmth in the immense feeling of coldness and cruelty emanating from the cursed spirit floating in the sky. Even Voldemort stepped out of his tent and looked in its direction with a calm and composed look. Despite the powerful cursed spirit, his lips curled into a cold smile. Seeing the gun demon before him, Asterian lowered his hand, making the enormous cursed spirit follow his movements and take a posture that resembled someone kneeling before their king. It can be said that this image would remain in the minds of countless people for a long time, earning Asterian his first epithet. Prince of Evil. Asterian commanded the cursed spirit to aim at the enemy camp with a calm expression. When the cursed spirit turned and aimed at the Death Eaters' camp, everyone in it felt a chill run through their bodies, trembling from head to toe. Voldemort, seeing this, showed an expression of dissatisfaction with the acts of clear betrayal of the customs of war. Pawn attacks pawn, and king attacks king. Rising into the air, the Dark Lord elevated himself to the same level as Asterion. What is the meaning of this, Asterion? Voldemort spoke, his voice cold and his expression impassive, even before two gigantic cursed spirits. Can't you see, Tom? I'm training. Showing a relaxed expression, Asterion, atop Nidhogg's head, crossed his legs and responded casually, not bothering to invent a better lie. He even called Voldemort by his real name on purpose to irritate him. Hearing the name he was called, Voldemort's face contorted. If you want to fight, say so, don't hide behind obvious lies. That was extremely rude. I'm obviously training, can't you see? To prove he was telling the truth, Asterion made the gun demon fire millions of shots at a nearby mountain, deliberately passing over the Death Eater's camp. The mountain, which took the full impact, ceased to exist the next moment, and a powerful explosion reverberated across the horizon, shaking the entire battlefield as if an earthquake had struck. See, I'm training. Showing an innocent look on his face, Asterion spoke with a firm and determined tone. Ha 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 ha. Voldemort began to laugh, a cold and hissing laugh, his gaze filled with anger at Asterion's obvious lie. He raised his hand and murmured. Innate spell manipulation, corruption of evil gods, universal decay. A halo of dark energy appeared in both of Voldemort's hands as he took a fighting stance, looking coldly at Asterion. Seeing Voldemort's actions, Asterion laughed and pointed his finger upwards, murmuring calmly, his voice spreading across the battlefield. Innate spell manipulation, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits, summoning. Above Asterion, 10 gigantic vortices of the purest darkness manifested. The enormous amount of negative magical energy drastically changed the environment, making the world seem to take on a darker hue. The witches and wizards below, seeing the two leaders finally about to clash, quickly disappeared from the battlefield. No one wanted to be killed casually by the shockwaves when the battle officially began. Asterion wanted to laugh but restrained himself. Unlike the fight against the special grade wizard using Mustafa's body, today he could fully manifest his cursed spirits without being drained in an instant. You die today, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Asterion spoke, his voice cold as a pentagram appeared in his red eyes. A full suit of armor with a crown floating above his head manifested on him. Today he would go all out against Voldemort, and the Dark Lord who had terrorized the British Isles would die today, like a sacrificial animal for his future. We'll see about that, Asterion Black. Voldemort pronounced coldly, his eyes like those of a snake staring at its prey. When he finished speaking, the Dark Lord disappeared and reappeared in front of the Crimson Dragon, punching it with colossal force. Boom! The punch smashed Nidhogg's entire face, splattering a large amount of purple blood. Voldemort didn't stop, he spun in the air and kicked towards Asterion's head. Asterion raised his arms and blocked the kick but was thrown backward, sliding through the air at great speed. After stabilizing himself in the air, Asterion looked at his arms where the kick had landed. His black armor with numerous terrifying red eyes was falling apart, and he could feel an aura of decay corroding his armor. Pouring more magical energy into the armor, it fully regenerated in an instant. That was a good kick, Asterion murmured, touching his armored arm. He would have to worry about Voldemort's attacks now, he wasn't a cursed spirit that could regenerate infinitely. If Voldemort's attack hit him without his armor, he would suffer significant damage. Nidhogg, whose face had been completely distorted by Voldemort's punch, regenerated in the same second and became utterly furious, storm clouds covering half of England. The thunderous sounds reverberated in the sky, with red electric lights dancing like snakes in the black clouds. The gun demon also didn't remain idle, letting out a cruel laugh and pointing its weapons at Voldemort. In the same instant, both special-grade cursed spirits attacked. Bullets the size of houses and gigantic bolts of lightning assailed Voldemort, who showed no concern for the attacks. A black halo covered his entire body, enveloping him like a flickering flame. All attacks, no matter how powerful, were forced to decay when they touched the black energy halo, turning into nothing. With his hair fluttering in the fierce winds caused by Nidhogg's stormy weather, the black pentagram in Asterion's eyes began to spin, analyzing everything and anything related to Voldemort's innate technique. In Asterion's mind, countless mathematical forms, graphs, and scales began to appear. The overwhelming amount of information distorted his face with agonizing pain. Various other black pentagrams began to appear in his field of vision, a nearly insane, crazed smile forming on his lips. Analyze and destroy. A whisper escaped Asterian's lips. A tiny dark red lightning bolt shot out from one of his eyes, tearing through the air with a buzzing sound. Voldemort, who had been calm until a moment ago, felt all the hairs on his body stand on end at the imminent danger, every cell in his body screaming at him to flee as quickly as possible. He only had time to move slightly to the side, attempting to dodge the attack, but a dark red energy bolt still hit his shoulder. When the dark red energy bolt struck his shoulder, all matter disintegrated, blood, muscles, bones, and flesh all turning to nothing, leaving a massive hole from the base of his neck to his shoulder. Voldemort's eyes widened as he looked at the enormous hole in his shoulder with a horrified and incredulous gaze. The fear of death, hidden since he was a child, exploded all at once. Voldemort's red eyes turned to Asterion, and he finally noticed the pentagram in Asterian's eyes, his own eyes widening even more. "You're insane! How could you perform that suicidal surgery?" Voldemort screamed hysterically, feeling death approaching. The fear, terror, and envy made him look like a madman at that moment. "That look on your face is good. I'll put it in an animated portrait at the entrance of the Black Mansion," Asterion said, showing a wide smile. Despite feeling his entire body writhing in pain and his head almost exploding from the sheer amount of information, he felt that all the price he paid was worth it at that moment. He wondered if this was how Rose felt when using the six eyes to their fullest extent. This feeling of omniscience was almost addictive, as if everything was within his grasp. Voldemort's face twisted grotesquely at Asterion's humiliating words. Joining his hands and making a seal, he opened his mouth and screamed, full of anger and fury. Domain expansion, final decay of the universe. Asterion was not to be outdone and also used his domain expansion. Domain expansion, dark side of the primordial universe. Both materialized their innate techniques, their souls exposed in the barriers forming around them. Asterion's expansion emerged behind him like a dark vortex, a cold and lifeless abyssal vastness, swallowing all the malice and sins accumulated by humanity, a pit of all conceivable evil. Voldemort's expansion emerged behind him like a universe at the end of its life, devoid of any sign of life, atoms so still that the already cold universe remained eternally frozen in time. When the two worlds collided, a mushroom cloud rose to the skies. The ground was torn and shredded, large chunks of earth were hurled upwards, and a violent shockwave swept across the land, dragging everything and anything with it. Chapter 100, Chapter 98, The Death of Voldemort, 2, an end of the first volume. After the explosion from the collision of domain expansions, what followed was the purest brutality tearing through the fabric of reality. The sky changed completely in color, becoming a mix of darkness and redness. Black sparks like somber snow fell across the battlefield. Within the domain expansion, Asterion and Voldemort faced each other. While Asterion maintained a calm expression, Voldemort stared back with a crazed and fearful look. He felt his domain expansion losing in the battle, not due to a difference in techniques, but because of the amount of magical energy used. The opposing side had poured an incalculable amount of magical energy, and he had not done so. In less than a blink of an eye, Voldemort's domain expansion shattered before his widened eyes. He saw it fragment like shards of glass passing before him, and before he could articulate any word, Asterion's expansion enveloped him. Voldemort found himself in a pit of pure malevolence, where all the resentment, hatred, and rage of humanity converged in one place. Millions, billions, trillions of voices overlapped, creating an infernal angelic choir echoing in his mind. His deepest fear was infinitely amplified, a sensory experience no human had ever witnessed. The avalanche of sensations flooding his brain was so overwhelming that he couldn't move or speak, only his eyes widened in indescribable horror. A thick, black liquid akin to tar began to cover Voldemort's body, starting from his feet and slowly creeping up his legs. The liquid seemed to have a life of its own, pulling him down into a steaming, viscous sea. As the black liquid enveloped him, Voldemort's expression became increasingly terrified. He raised his hand in a desperate plea for help, but it was futile. Only his head remained above the tar, his eyes reflecting the absolute terror of an inevitable fate. When the domain expansion dissipated, Asterion observed the Dark Lord, who had terrorized England, kneeling on the ground, gazing silently and madly at the sky. Saliva dribbled from Voldemort's mouth as he could no longer express any emotion on his face. Taking a step towards Voldemort, Asterion materialized a long black sword in his hand, adorned with several red eyes. The sword measured 2 meters in length and 5 centimeters in width. Approaching the kneeling man, Asterion shifted the sword's position, holding it point down, with the blade's tip just inches from Voldemort's eye. Asterion's red eyes gazed calmly and serenely at the man. not at all relieved to have defeated Voldemort. After all, if he hadn't managed to win even after awakening his second innate technique, Asterion might as well kill himself in shame. The soldiers of the Clock Tower and the Death Eaters appeared on the battlefield as silence fell over the scene, everyone watching Voldemort kneeling before a 13-year-old boy, about to be killed by him. The battlefield went completely quiet, interrupted only by the rapid breaths of all present. "It's been a displeasure knowing you, Tom Marvolo Riddle," Asterion said coldly, devoid of any mockery or disdain, perhaps granting the minimum respect a monster like Voldemort might deserve at the end of his life. Without hesitation, Asterion fortified his body with magical energy and swung down his sword with force. The blade pierced Voldemort's right eye and continued downward, cutting through him from top to bottom. The man, who had become deranged after Asterion's domain expansion, did not react even as the sword passed through his body. Until the end, his gaze remained fixed on the sky, as if imagining something that no one else would ever know. A barrage of applause erupted from the Clock Tower soldiers. No one was happier than they were to see Voldemort finally dead, the same monster who had killed their loved ones and friends. Asterion retrieved the sword from Voldemort's body, splattering blood on his face and clothes. Despite the applause, his face showed little emotion. His red eyes reflected a surprising calm. Perhaps what he truly felt was boredom. Even the satisfaction he thought he would feel upon killing Voldemort did not come, as if he had done something mundane. Asterion's gaze focused on the lifeless body lost in thought. Meanwhile, in the Death Eaters' camp, all Death Eaters fled without a second thought, abandoning the cause they had fought for. The witches and wizards from Germany and France who had been involved in the Civil War also retreated after Voldemort's death. Bellatrix was sitting in the main tent with a large snake in her hands. Not far from her, lying on the ground, was the body of her ex-husband, Rodolphus Lestrange, the patriarch of the House of Lestrange. His eyes had been gouged out and his tongue cut, numerous torture wounds covering his body. Nagini's gaze in Bellatrix's arms at that moment was entirely different from the look the snake had before. This was a cold and somber gaze. "Let's go, Bellatrix," a cold male voice came from the snake's mouth, which was utterly shocking. Each Horcrux had its own life, so what happened to Voldemort was not transferred to this Horcrux. But Bellatrix didn't move a muscle despite the order from her apparent master. Instead, she looked at the snake with a mixture of anger and disgust. "You've ruined my master's plan," she said, continuing unabated by the snake's shocked gaze. "I was supposed to redeem myself in the eyes of the people and rise as a heroine who killed the dreaded Dark Lord. But none of that came to pass as my master intended, all because of you. But it doesn't matter anymore at this moment, my master will become a hero in the eyes of the people." At that moment, Voldemort didn't need to hear any more. He knew Bellatrix was a traitor, and her betrayal came at a terrible time when he had no means to protect himself. Before Voldemort could say anything, he saw Bellatrix stand up and walk over to his diary, his other Horcrux. With calm eyes, he watched her take a vial from her bag and carefully drop a drop onto the diary. He was confident in the durability of his Horcruxes, mere liquid wouldn't destroy them. But he couldn't maintain his calm demeanor as he saw the diary emit green smoke and a mournful scream echoed in the tent, accompanied by a face resembling Voldemort's own. "Impossible! Impossible!" Before he could finish his hysterical shout, he felt Nagini's body begin to stiffen. He knew what was happening. This Horcrux too had been poisoned by Bellatrix's strange liquid, and he was about to die. The most feared and powerful Dark Lord to ever set foot on the British Isles would die from mere poisoning. "Basilisk venom," Bellatrix spoke, shaking the vial containing the poison. "My master gave it to me to destroy all your Horcruxes at the right moment." Voldemort widened his eyes and realized that all his other Horcruxes would be in Asterion Black's hands. Even at the end of his life, he still couldn't understand how his Horcruxes were discovered, especially by Asterion Black. Full of resentment and hatred, Voldemort's eyes closed for the last time. The Dark Lord, Voldemort, was dead. Hogwarts, Headmaster's office. Watching Rose writhing in bed, her face showing a pained expression, Dumbledore's face grew dark. He knew Tom was struggling to take over Rose's body through the Horcrux. If Rose lost the battle and Voldemort won, Dumbledore couldn't imagine what Voldemort could do using Rose Potter's body. Though the chance was minimal, Albus Dumbledore firmly held the Elder Wand, ready to end Rose's life the moment she showed signs of losing the battle. Suddenly, Dumbledore noticed Rose's face relaxing, and the girl soon opened her eyes to his surprise. The most powerful man in the world hadn't noticed, but Rose's eyes seemed different, reflecting the universe itself. From the girl's body emerged green smoke that took on the face resembling Tom Riddle. This face roared reluctantly before disappearing completely. "How are you, Rose?" Dumbledore discreetly stowed away his wand and asked with a concerned tone. Finally free and enlightened, Rose whispered, still looking directly at the ceiling, her pupils glimpsing the vastness of emptiness and a cold, boundless universe. A crazed smile outlining her lips.
Thanks for listening.